I have been driving big rigs for 17 years now, and I thought I knew every stretch of Interstate 94 through North Dakota like the back of my hand. From Fargo to the Montana border, I have hauled everything from farm equipment to wind turbine blades through every kind of weather this state can throw at you. Blizzards, ice storms, whiteout conditions that reduce visibility to nothing. I have seen it all and survived it all. But what happened to me last February on a routine run through the Badlands still keeps me awake at night, and I still cannot explain what I saw or where I ended up when that storm hit. My name is Abram Keene, and I have been running freight for Dakota Logistics out of Bismarck for the better part of 2 decades. The company specializes in oversized loads, which means I spend most of my time hauling equipment that requires special permits and escort vehicles. Wind turbine components, industrial machinery, prefabricated building sections, the kind of cargo that makes other drivers nervous. I have always liked the challenge of it, the precision required to maneuver 70 feet of truck and trailer through tight spaces and difficult conditions. It is honest work that pays well, and it has allowed me to raise 2 daughters mostly on my own after my wife Sarah passed away from cancer 9 years ago. The day everything changed started out routine enough. I was picking up 3 sections of wind turbine blade from a manufacturing facility outside of Jamestown, destined for a wind farm being built near Glendive, Montana. The load was massive, each blade section running 40 feet long and weighing close to 8,000 pounds. With the specialized trailer and all the rigging equipment, my total rig length was pushing 80 feet. It was the kind of haul that required careful planning and constant attention to weather conditions, especially in February when North Dakota winters are at their worst. The forecast that morning was concerning but not alarming. The National Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning for the region, calling for heavy snow and high winds starting around noon. They were predicting 6 to 10 inches of accumulation with gusts up to 40 miles per hour, conditions that would make driving difficult but not impossible for someone with my experience. I had driven through worse storms than this dozens of times. The key was timing, getting as far west as possible before the worst of it hit, and knowing when to pull over and wait it out if conditions became too dangerous. I left Jamestown around 8 in the morning, giving myself plenty of cushion before the storm was supposed to arrive. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, and the temperature was hovering right around 15 degrees. Cold enough to keep any precipitation as snow rather than rain, but not so cold that diesel fuel would gel in my tanks. The wind was already picking up, though, gusting hard enough to rock my empty trailer as I drove to the loading facility. I could feel the weight of the approaching storm in the air, that peculiar pressure and stillness that comes before a major weather system moves through. The loading process took longer than expected. The turbine blade sections had to be secured with extreme care, multiple chains and straps positioned precisely to prevent any shifting during transport. The facility crew was professional and thorough, but they were also nervous about the incoming weather. By the time we finished all the paperwork and safety inspections, it was almost 11 o'clock, and the first snowflakes were starting to fall. Light stuff at first, just a dusting that blew across the pavement in swirling patterns. But I could see the darker clouds moving in from the northwest, and I knew the serious snow was not far behind. I called my dispatcher to confirm I was loaded and heading west. She asked about the weather and whether I wanted to postpone the delivery until the storm passed. I told her I would be fine, that I planned to make it at least as far as Dickinson before the worst conditions hit. From there, I could hole up at a truck stop and wait out the storm if necessary. She reminded me to check in every hour and to pull over immediately if visibility got too bad. Standard protocol for winter driving in North Dakota, and advice I had followed religiously throughout my career. The first hour of driving was manageable. The snow was falling steadily, but not heavily, and traffic on Interstate 94 was light. Most of the smart drivers had already pulled over or delayed their trips, leaving the highway mostly empty except for a few other commercial vehicles and the occasional brave soul in a pickup truck. I kept my speed down to 45 miles per hour, well below the posted limit but appropriate for the conditions. With a load as large and unwieldy as wind turbine blades, you cannot afford to make sudden movements or corrections. Every input to the steering wheel and every touch of the brakes has to be smooth and deliberate. Around noon, just as I was passing through the small town of Steele, the weather took a serious turn for the worse. The snowfall intensified dramatically, going from moderate to heavy in a matter of minutes. Visibility dropped from a quarter mile to maybe 100 feet, and the wind picked up to the point where it was buffeting my trailer hard enough that I had to fight the steering wheel constantly to keep the rig centered in my lane. The highway department had not yet deployed snowplows to this section, which meant the pavement was rapidly accumulating snow. I could feel my drive wheels starting to slip occasionally, that subtle loss of traction that tells you the road surface is getting dangerous. I grabbed my CB radio and switched to channel 19 to check in with other drivers in the area. The channel was busy with truckers sharing information about conditions further west. What I heard was not encouraging. Multiple drivers were reporting whiteout conditions between Bismarck and Dickinson, with several trucks already pulled over on the shoulder waiting for the storm to pass. One driver said he had just passed a jackknifed semi near mile marker 173, and that state patrol was advising all commercial vehicles to find a safe place to stop. I checked my position and did some quick math. I was at mile marker 148, which put me about 25 miles east of Bismarck. Under normal conditions, that would be maybe 20 minutes of driving, but in this storm it could take an hour or more. I had to make a decision: push forward and try to reach the truck stops on the west side of Bismarck before conditions got any worse, or find a place to pull over right now and wait out the storm. Every instinct I had was telling me to stop, but there was nowhere safe to park with a load this size. I needed either a proper truck stop with a large parking lot, or at minimum a wide shoulder where I would not be a hazard to other traffic. That was when I started noticing something odd on my CB radio. In between the normal trucker chatter about road conditions and weather reports, I kept hearing fragments of another conversation. It was hard to make out clearly through the static and interference, but it sounded like someone giving directions or coordinates. I heard a man's voice say something about southbound escort at marker 212, and then a woman's voice responding with "copy that," maintaining visual on the convoy. The terminology sounded official, like maybe highway patrol or DOT workers coordinating a road closure. But something about the phrasing was off, like they were using codes or references that I did not recognize. I tried to focus on my driving as the storm continued to intensify. The snow was now falling so heavily that my windshield wipers, even on their highest setting, could barely keep up. The accumulation on the road was getting deeper, and I could feel my truck starting to labor as the tires fought for grip in the snow. My speed had dropped to 30 miles per hour, and I was seriously considering finding any available space to pull over and wait this out. Oversized load regulations be damned. That was when I saw the sign through the swirling snow. It was one of those standard green interstate signs announcing an upcoming exit, but something about it caught my attention. Exit 2 to 12, service area 1 mile, it read. I had driven this stretch of Interstate 94 hundreds of times over the years, and I could not remember there being an exit 212, at least not one with a service area. The exits in this region were spaced far apart, mostly providing access to small towns or county roads, and there were very few dedicated service areas between Jamestown and Bismarck. But the sign looked official enough, with the standard DOT formatting and reflective lettering. More importantly, it offered exactly what I needed right now: a place to get off the highway and wait out the storm safely. I eased my rig over toward the right lane, using my turn signal even though there was no other traffic visible in either direction. The wind was howling now, driving the snow horizontally across the highway and creating that disorienting effect where you cannot tell if the white you are seeing is falling snow or snow being blown across the road surface. The exit ramp appeared ahead, marked by reflective poles that were barely visible through the whiteout conditions. I slowed even further and carefully guided my truck and trailer onto the ramp, feeling the resistance as my tires plowed through 6 inches of unplowed snow. The ramp curved to the right in a gentle arc, and as I followed it, I noticed something strange. There were tire tracks in the snow ahead of me, relatively fresh tracks that had not yet been completely filled in by the accumulation. Someone else had taken this exit recently, probably within the last hour or so. That gave me a small measure of comfort. If another truck had come this way and found a safe place to park, then I was probably making the right decision. I continued down the exit ramp, which seemed longer than normal for a standard highway exit. It curved and descended for what felt like a quarter mile before finally leveling out. The road at the bottom was narrower than I expected, just a 2-lane surface with no clear markings visible under the snow. But those tire tracks were still there, twin grooves leading forward into the storm. I followed the tracks, keeping my speed down to a crawl and peering through the windshield for any sign of the service area the sign had promised. The landscape around me was completely white, no landmarks visible, no buildings or structures of any kind, just flat white terrain disappearing into white sky. That total sensory whiteout that can make you feel like you are driving through an empty void. The only reference points I had were those tire tracks and the narrow road beneath my wheels. My CB radio crackled to life again, that same fragmented conversation cutting through the static. This time, I heard it more clearly. A man's voice said, "Unit 7, confirm visual on the last trailer section." And then a different voice, also male, responded, "Visual confirmed, proceeding to service point." There was something about the phrasing that bothered me. Unit 7 sounded like a radio call sign, but it was not the format used by State Patrol or Highway Department vehicles. And what did they mean by last trailer section? Were they talking about a convoy of some kind? I reached for my CB microphone to call out and identify myself, but before I could key the mic, the road ahead of me suddenly opened up into what looked like a parking area. Through the snow, I could make out several large shapes that had to be vehicles, and beyond them the dark outline of a low building. This must be the service area, though I still could not shake the feeling that something was not quite right about this place. I had never heard of a service facility at this location, and the whole setup seemed oddly isolated and poorly maintained for an official DOT rest area. But I was here now, and the storm was only getting worse. I could see several other trucks already parked in the lot, their shapes barely visible through the driving snow. At least I would not be waiting out the storm alone. I found an open space large enough for my oversized load and carefully maneuvered my rig into position, setting my parking brake and shutting down my engine. The sudden silence after hours of road noise was almost shocking, broken only by the howl of the wind and the ping of snow hitting my windshield. I sat in my cab for a moment, looking out at the service area and trying to get my bearings. The building was maybe 100 feet ahead, a single-story structure that looked like it might house restrooms and possibly a small office or maintenance shop. The other trucks in the lot were hard to see clearly through the snow, but I counted at least 4 or 5 of them. What struck me as odd was that they all appeared to be hauling similar loads to mine. Long, flatbed trailers carrying what looked like wind turbine components or other oversized industrial equipment. My CB radio crackled one more time, and this time the message was crystal clear. A woman's voice, calm and professional, said, "All units, this is Marla Fenwick with State Patrol. We have multiple reports of severe conditions on I-94 westbound. All commercial vehicles are advised to seek shelter immediately. Exit 212 service area is open and operational for the duration of the storm. The message repeated twice, then faded back into static and white noise. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. So, this was an official emergency service area, and State Patrol was actively directing trucks here to ride out the storm. That explained the other vehicles with similar loads. They must have been part of the same general convoy of wind energy equipment heading west when the storm hit. I grabbed my heavy winter coat from behind the seat and prepared to make a run for the building to check in and see what facilities were available. But as I reached for the door handle, I noticed something that made me pause. The tire tracks I had followed into the parking area did not lead to any of the parked trucks. Instead, they continued past the building, heading further into the whiteout conditions beyond. Someone had driven through here recently but had not stopped. They had kept going, out past the service area and into whatever lay beyond. Why would anyone do that in weather like this? Where could they possibly be heading that was worth driving further into a blizzard? I looked at the building again, studying it more carefully through the snow. Now that I was stopped and could focus, I started noticing details that bothered me. The structure looked old, its metal siding weathered and showing signs of rust. The windows were dark. No lights visible inside despite the woman on the radio saying the facility was operational. And most troubling of all, I could not see any State Patrol vehicles anywhere in the parking area. If this was an official emergency shelter being managed by law enforcement, there should be at least one patrol car on site. Something was not right here. I have been driving long enough to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was telling me that this place was wrong somehow. But what choice did I have? The storm outside was only getting worse. Visibility was nearly zero, and I had no idea how long it would last. I could not just sit in my truck for hours with the engine off. I would freeze. I needed to at least check out the building and see if there was heat and shelter available. I pulled my coat tight, pushed open my door, and stepped down from the cab into the driving snow. The wind hit me like a physical force, almost knocking me off my feet. The temperature had dropped dramatically, and the wind chill had to be well below zero. I lowered my head and started walking toward the building, following what I thought was a path through the snow. Each step was a struggle, the wind pushing against me and the snow stinging any exposed skin on my face. When I reached the building and grabbed the door handle, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The door was unlocked, but there was a handwritten notice taped to the inside of the glass. The paper was yellowed and faded, the ink barely legible. But I could just make out the words, "Maintenance Schedule, Winter 2019, Shift Assignments." Under that was a list of names and dates. The dates were from February of 4 years ago. But the paper looked fresh, the tape holding it in place still sticky and intact. I pulled the door open and stepped inside, grateful to be out of the wind, even if the interior was only marginally warmer than outside. The entrance area was dim, lit only by emergency lights that cast a pale green glow over everything. I could see a corridor leading deeper into the building, with doorways opening off to either side. The walls were covered with bulletin boards displaying various notices and schedules, all of them looking official but outdated. That was when I heard the sound. It was faint at first, just barely audible over the howl of the wind outside. A rhythmic thumping noise, like metal clanging against metal. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the building, a regular pattern that sounded almost mechanical. And underneath it, I could swear I heard that same CB radio chatter. Those fragmented voices talking about units and convoy positions and visual confirmations. I stood in that entrance area, dripping melting snow onto the floor, and tried to decide what to do. Every rational part of my brain was telling me to get back in my truck and drive away from this place, storm or no storm. But where would I go? The highway behind me was completely impassable now, and I had no idea what lay ahead if I followed those mysterious tire tracks out past the service area. I pulled out my phone to call my dispatcher and let her know where I was, but I was not surprised to find that I had no signal. This far out in rural North Dakota, in the middle of a blizzard, cell coverage was non-existent. My only connection to the outside world was my CB radio back in the truck, and the only voices on that were those strange transmissions about units and convoys and something about exit 212. I took a deep breath and started walking down the corridor, following the sound of that rhythmic clanging. I needed to find someone, anyone who could explain what this place was and why it felt so wrong. The doors on either side of the hallway were labeled with typical service area functions: restrooms, maintenance, office, break room. I tried the office door first, but it was locked. Through the small window, I could see a desk and filing cabinets, but no people and no lights. The clanging sound was getting louder as I moved deeper into the building, and I realized it was coming from the far end of the corridor. There was a door there marked Service Bay, and I could see light seeping out from under it. I approached slowly, my hand reaching for the handle, and that was when my CB radio back in the truck crackled to life loud enough that I could hear it even from inside the building. The woman's voice came through clear and steady. "Unit designation Abram Keene, wind turbine transport. You are logged at service point 212. Please proceed to service bay for mandatory inspection and processing. This is not a request." I froze with my hand on the door handle. They knew my name. They knew exactly what I was hauling. And they knew I was standing right here, right now, about to enter that service bay. I had not spoken to anyone since arriving at this place. I had not identified myself on the radio, so how could they possibly know who I was? I pulled my hand back from that door handle like it was red hot. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the wind howling outside. The voice on the CB radio had known my name, my exact cargo, and my precise location inside this building. Nobody should have had that information. I had not checked in with anyone since taking the exit, had not identified myself to any official authority. Yet somehow they were tracking me with a level of detail that was impossible to explain. I stood there in that dim hallway, trying to think through my options rationally despite the fear crawling up my spine. The smart move would be to turn around right now, walk back to my truck, and get the hell out of this place regardless of the storm conditions. But that woman's voice had said this was not a request. The phrasing bothered me more than I wanted to admit. It implied authority, but also something else, something that sounded almost like a threat. The rhythmic clanging from behind the service bay door continued, steady and mechanical. I could hear other sounds now too, the hum of machinery and what might have been voices speaking in low tones. Whatever was happening in that room, it was operational and active. Someone was in there working, which meant I was not alone in this facility. That should have been comforting. But instead, it made everything feel more sinister. I decided to check the other rooms first before confronting whatever was behind that service bay door. Knowledge is survival when you are in a situation you do not understand, and I needed to understand what this place really was. I tried the break room door and found it unlocked. Inside was a small space with a table, a few chairs, and an old coffee maker sitting on a counter. The room looked like it had been used recently. There were coffee mugs in the sink, not dusty or cobwebbed, but simply unwashed. A newspaper lay folded on the table, and when I picked it up to check the date, my hands started shaking. The newspaper was the Bismarck Tribune, dated February 14th, 2019. 4 years ago, almost to the day. The paper was not yellowed or brittle like you would expect from something that old. It felt fresh, the ink still sharp and clear. The front page headline talked about a severe winter storm moving through the region, with warnings for travelers to stay off the highways. I scanned the article quickly and felt my stomach drop. The storm they were describing, the timing, the severity, the affected areas, it all matched what was happening outside right now. But that was impossible. This was not 2019. This was 2023. I set the paper down carefully and looked around the break room more closely. There was a calendar on the wall, one of those promotional ones that businesses give away. It showed February 2019, with several dates circled in red marker. The 14th was circled heavily, with a note written beside it that said Major Convoy Operation, All Staff Report. Today was February 14th, 2023, 4 years later to the exact date. My mind was racing through possible explanations. Maybe this place had been abandoned in 2019 and nobody had bothered to update the calendar or throw away the old newspaper. Maybe the coffee mugs in the sink had been sitting there unwashed for 4 years, preserved by the cold and dry conditions. But that did not explain the fresh feel of the newspaper or the fact that the coffee maker was still plugged in and had a red light indicating it was in standby mode, ready to brew. I moved to the maintenance room next, using my shoulder to force open the swollen door. Inside was a cluttered space filled with tools, spare parts, and equipment for road maintenance. There were several logbooks stacked on a workbench, and I flipped through them quickly. They were filled with handwritten entries documenting vehicle inspections, equipment repairs, and supply inventories. The most recent entries were all from February 2019. The handwriting was clear and consistent, showing routine maintenance activities for what appeared to be a small fleet of trucks and service vehicles. But what caught my attention was a notation repeated several times throughout the logs. Escort duty for turbine convoy, Route 94 to Service Point 2 through 12. The entries were signed by someone named Thatcher Voigt, who appeared to be some kind of maintenance supervisor or operations manager. Multiple entries referenced coordinating with State Patrol, specifically mentioning someone named Marla Fenwick. That was the name of the woman whose voice I had heard on the CB radio, the one who had just identified me by name. I pulled out my phone and tried again to get a signal, hoping to call someone, anyone, who could help me make sense of this situation. Still nothing. The storm outside must be interfering with the cell towers, or maybe we were just too far from civilization for coverage. I thought about going back to my truck and trying to raise someone on the CB, but I was afraid of what voice might respond. If they knew my name and location, what else did they know, and what did they want from me? The sound of the clanging from the service bay suddenly stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear footsteps moving around in there, heavy boots on concrete. Then I heard a door opening and closing, and the footsteps started coming down the hallway toward where I was standing. I looked around frantically for somewhere to hide, but the maintenance room was small and cluttered with no good cover. I pressed myself against the wall behind the door and waited, barely breathing. The footsteps passed by the maintenance room and continued toward the entrance. I heard the exterior door open, letting in a blast of wind and the sound of the storm, then close again. Whoever it was had gone outside. I gave them a minute to get clear, then carefully made my way back to the hallway and looked toward the entrance. Through the window in the door, I could see a figure walking across the parking lot, head down against the wind, moving between the parked trucks. This was my chance to check the service bay while it was unoccupied. I moved quickly down the hallway and tried the door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open slowly and stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the bright fluorescent lights overhead. The room was large, taking up most of the building's interior space. It looked like a combination vehicle maintenance bay and logistics center. There were tool benches along one wall, a hydraulic lift in the center, and several desks with computers and radio equipment. What made my blood run cold were the walls. They were covered with documentation, schedules, photographs, and maps, but not recent documentation. Everything on those walls was from 2019. There were work schedules listing staff names and shift times for February 2019. There were photographs of trucks and equipment, with dates stamped in the corner showing various days in February 4 years ago. And there was a large map of Interstate 94 with route markers and annotations showing convoy positions and timing. I walked closer to examine the map and noticed something that made no sense. The map showed exit 212 clearly marked as a service point, but I knew for a fact that this exit did not appear on modern maps of I-94. I had studied highway maps of this region countless times over the years, and there was no exit 212 between Jamestown and Bismarck. The exit numbers jumped from 200 to 221, skipping the entire 200 to 220 range. Yet, here it was on this map, marked as an official DOT service facility. One of the desks had a logbook open, and I could not resist reading it. The entries were written in a neat, precise hand, documenting the arrival and departure of various trucks. Each entry included the driver's name, company, cargo type, and arrival time. I scanned down the list and felt my heart nearly stop when I saw an entry near the bottom of the page. February 14, 2019, 13:47 hours. Driver, Abram Keene, Dakota Logistics, cargo. Wind turbine blade sections, 3. Route, Jamestown to Glendive. Status, arrived for mandatory storm shelter. Vehicle, Kenworth W900 with specialized flatbed trailer. Notes, driver expressed concern about unusual facility, recommended for processing. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the logbook. This was impossible. This entry was from 4 years ago, but it described me, my cargo, my route, everything exactly as it was today. The handwriting was old, the ink slightly faded, but the entry was there in black and white. According to this log, I had been here before. On this exact date 4 years ago, I had arrived at this facility during a storm while hauling wind turbine components. But I had no memory of any of this. 4 years ago in February, I had been running completely different routes, hauling different cargo. I had never taken an exit to a service facility that I did not recognize. And I certainly would have remembered something as strange as what I was experiencing right now. Yet, here was documentary evidence suggesting otherwise. I flipped back through earlier pages in the logbook, looking for more entries, trying to understand the pattern. What I found made everything worse. There were dozens of entries for other drivers, other trucks, other dates, but many of them had a notation in the status column that said either processing complete or departed to secondary point. A few entries, maybe 1 in 10, had a different notation that simply said retained. I did not like the sound of that word, retained. It implied that some drivers who came to this facility did not leave, or at least did not leave in the way they expected to. I thought about those tire tracks I had followed into the parking area, the ones that had continued past the service building and out into the whiteout. Had those drivers been retained, or had they departed to some secondary point? And where exactly was this secondary point? The CB radio equipment on one of the desks suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. It was not tuned to channel 19 like a normal CB would be. Instead, the display showed it was monitoring multiple frequencies simultaneously, scanning through them in a preset pattern. I could hear fragments of conversations, drivers reporting their positions, weather updates, discussions about road closures. Normal trucker chatter from across the region. Then the scanner stopped on a frequency, and the woman's voice came through again, clear and calm. Unit 7, this is Fenwick. Target vehicle has entered the service bay. Recommend immediate containment before subject attempts departure. Voight is in position outside. Proceed with standard protocol. The voice that responded was male, deeper and rougher than the woman's. Copy that, Fenwick. Moving to secure the building now. Subject matches the profile from the previous cycle. Should be a clean extraction. I did not wait to hear any more. I turned and ran for the hallway, my boots slipping on the concrete floor. Behind me, I heard the exterior door bang open and heavy footsteps entering the building. They were coming for me, whoever they were, and I had no intention of finding out what they meant by extraction. I made it to the entrance and grabbed the door handle, but it would not budge. The door was locked from the outside, something I had not noticed when I came in. There was a deadbolt that required a key, and I had no way to open it. I was trapped inside the building with whoever was coming down that hallway behind me. I looked around desperately for another exit. There had to be a back door, an emergency exit, something. The footsteps were getting closer and I could hear that male voice calling out, "Mr. Keene, there is no need to panic. We just need to verify some information and complete your processing. This will go much easier if you cooperate." The way he said my name, so casual and familiar, made my skin crawl. I spotted a door at the far end of the hallway marked "Emergency Exit" and ran for it, praying it was not locked like the main entrance. I hit the crash bar hard and felt a surge of relief when the door flew open. Cold air and snow blasted into my face, but I did not care. I was outside and moving, and that was all that mattered. The emergency exit led to the back of the building, away from the parking area where my truck was located. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me through the driving snow, but I started running parallel to the building, hoping to circle around and reach my truck from a different direction. The wind was vicious, driving the snow into my face and stealing the breath from my lungs. My coat was heavy and warm, but the wind chill was already seeping through. I made it around the corner of the building and stopped, pressing myself against the wall to catch my breath and get my bearings. That was when I saw him. A man was standing between me and the parking lot. Maybe 30 feet away, he was wearing a heavy winter coat and a hat pulled low over his face, but he was standing perfectly still despite the howling wind, like he had been waiting for me to come exactly this way, like he knew exactly where I would run. "Mr. Keene," he called out, his voice barely audible over the storm. "My name is Thatcher Voight. I'm the operations manager for this facility. You need to come back inside where it's safe. This storm is only going to get worse, and you won't survive out here for long." I recognized the name from the logbooks. Thatcher Voight, the maintenance supervisor who had signed off on all those convoy operations back in 2019. The same name that appeared in the entry about me, the entry that should not exist. "How do you know my name?" I shouted back at him. "What is this place? Why does your logbook have an entry about me from 4 years ago?" Voight took a step closer, moving with surprising ease through snow that was now almost knee-deep. "This is exactly what the sign said it was, Mr. Keene. A service area. A place for drivers to shelter during dangerous weather. You're here because you needed shelter, just like all the others who have come before you." What others? And what did that voice on the radio mean by processing and extraction? Voight stopped about 15 feet away, close enough that I could see his face now in the glow of the building's emergency lights. He looked ordinary enough, maybe 50 years old, weathered skin and tired eyes, but there was something wrong about the way he looked at me. His expression was sad, almost apologetic, but there was also a resignation there that frightened me more than anger would have. "The storm brought you here, Mr. Keene. The same storm that brings all of you here every 4 years, always on February 14th. You followed the signs and the tire tracks because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what the pattern requires. What pattern? What are you talking about? I was backing away from him as he spoke, moving toward where I thought the parking lot should be, trying to keep him in sight while also watching for the other person I had heard in the building. The convoy pattern, the route marker pattern. Exit 2 to 12 appears when the conditions are right, when the storm reaches a certain intensity and the date aligns. Drivers hauling specific cargo on specific routes are drawn here. You were drawn here, just like you were drawn here 4 years ago, though you don't remember it. My back hit something solid and I realized I had reached one of the parked trucks. I used it as a guide, keeping one hand on the cold metal as I worked my way along its length toward where I hoped my own truck was parked. Voight followed, maintaining his distance but matching my pace exactly. That logbook entry was real, he continued. You were here in 2019, in this exact situation. We processed you then, sent you on your way with no memory of what happened, but the pattern requires repetition. Every 4 years, the same storm, the same date, the same drivers. You'll be here again in 2027, and again in 2031, cycling through forever unless you make a different choice. I wanted to tell him he was insane, that what he was saying was impossible. But I could not deny the evidence I had seen with my own eyes. The dated documents that looked fresh, the logbook entry with my name from 4 years ago, the way everything about this place felt wrong and out of time. Something impossible was happening here, and I was caught in the middle of it. What choice? I asked, my voice barely carrying over the wind. What are you talking about? Voight stopped and pointed past me, into the whiteout beyond the parking area. The tire tracks you followed into this facility, they continue on past it. There's a service road that leads deeper into the pattern, to the places where time works differently. Some drivers choose to follow that road instead of cycling through the same 4-year loop forever. They go looking for answers, for a way to break the pattern. And what happens to them? I had reached my truck now, could feel the familiar shape of my tractor unit beside me. My keys were in my pocket. If I could just get to the cab and get the engine started, maybe I could drive out of here. Nobody knows, Voight said quietly. They disappear into the whiteout, following coordinates that don't exist on any map. Some people think they find a way out, back to normal time and normal roads. Other people think they just drive forever, trapped in the storm. But either way, they don't cycle through exit 212 anymore. They make a choice and they vanish. I pulled my keys from my pocket and fumbled with them, trying to find the right one while keeping my eyes on Voight. And you? What are you? If this place exists outside of normal time, how are you here? For the first time, Voight's expression changed. The sadness deepened, and when he spoke his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. I was a driver once, long time ago. I took exit 212 during a storm and made the choice to stay. Someone has to run this facility, to log the arrivals, to give the warnings. I'm the maintenance supervisor because that's the role the pattern needed filled. Just like Marla Fenwick monitors the radio frequencies because that's her role. We're all part of it now. Behind Voight, I could see another figure emerging from the building. The woman, presumably Marla Fenwick, was moving through the snow with the same unnatural ease that Voight showed. They were not affected by the storm the way I was. They existed here in some different way, playing roles that had been assigned to them by whatever impossible force created this place. I got my truck door open and pulled myself up into the cab, my frozen fingers barely able to grip the steering wheel. Voight called out one more time as I turned the key in the ignition. If you drive back to the highway, you'll forget all of this by tomorrow. You'll deliver your cargo, go home to your daughters, live your life normally until February 14th, 2027. Then the storm will come again, and you'll see the signs for exit 212, and you'll end up right back here. That's how the cycle works. The engine turned over. Diesel rumbling to life. I could feel heat starting to flow from the vents. Smell the familiar scent of my cab. This was real. This was normal. Everything outside might be impossible and wrong, but inside my truck was the world I understood. "Or you can follow the tracks," Voight shouted over the sound of my engine. "Drive past this facility, out into the whiteout, and see where the pattern really leads. It's your choice, Mr. Keene. Same choice we all have to make eventually." I sat there with my hand on the gear shift, looking out at the swirling snow. The tire tracks that had led me here were still visible, twin grooves leading away from the service building into the white void beyond. No one knew where they led. No one knew what existed out there in the places where time did not work right. But I knew what existed back on the highway. 4 more years of normal life. Then another storm. Another exit 212. Another cycle through this nightmare. And 4 years after that, and 4 years after that, forever. Unless I made a different choice right now. I looked at Voight standing there in the snow, at Marla Fenwick beside him, both of them waiting to see what I would do. I thought about the logbook entry from 2019, about the life I did not remember living, about the cycles I had apparently already been through without knowing it. Then I put my truck in gear and started driving, but I did not turn back toward the exit ramp. I did not head for the highway and the promise of normal life and forgotten memories. Instead, I followed those mysterious tire tracks, pointing my truck toward the whiteout and whatever impossible destination lay beyond. The service building disappeared behind me almost instantly, swallowed by the storm. Voight and Fenwick vanished from my mirrors. There was only white ahead, white behind, white all around. Just me and my truck and those fading tire tracks leading deeper into the pattern. I had no idea where I was going or what I would find. But I knew I could not spend the rest of eternity cycling through the same impossible day every 4 years. Whatever was out there in the whiteout, whatever existed at the end of this road that did not appear on any map, it had to be better than that. The tracks ahead were getting harder to see, filling in with fresh snow faster than I could follow them. But I kept driving, pushing forward through the white void, searching for an answer or an exit or anything that would break this pattern. And that was when I saw the lights ahead. Not the lights of a building or another vehicle, but something else entirely. A strange glow in the distance, pulsing in rhythm with something I could almost hear under the howl of the wind. The tracks led straight toward those lights. I drove on, deeper into the impossible storm, following a path that should not exist toward lights that could not be real. Behind me, exit 212 faded into memory and legend. Ahead, something else was waiting. The lights ahead were not like anything I had ever seen before. They pulsed in a rhythm that felt almost organic, expanding and contracting like something breathing. The color shifted between pale blue and white, creating strange shadows in the driving snow that made it impossible to judge distance or size. I could have been looking at something 100 feet away or a mile away. In a whiteout like this, with no reference points and no horizon, your senses betray you completely. I kept my speed down to maybe 10 miles per hour, following those tire tracks that were now barely visible indentations in the snow. My truck lurched and bounced over uneven terrain that should not have existed on any service road. This was not maintained pavement anymore. It felt more like I was driving across open prairie or frozen fields, places where no truck should ever venture. But the tracks continued forward, twin grooves that someone or something had carved through this impossible landscape, and I followed them because I had committed to this path and there was no turning back now. The dashboard clock in my truck had stopped working. The digital display showed 13:47 and would not change no matter how long I drove. I checked my watch and found it had stopped as well, frozen at the exact same time. 13:47. I remembered that time from the logbook entry back at the service building. That was the arrival time listed for Abram Keene on February 14, 2019. The moment I had supposedly entered this pattern 4 years ago, time itself had locked in place for me. My CB radio was still functional, but the only thing coming through was static mixed with those strange, fragmented conversations I had heard earlier. Every few minutes, I would catch a snippet of someone talking about convoy positions or route markers, always using that odd, formal language that sounded official but wrong. I tried calling out several times, identifying myself and asking for anyone who could hear me to respond. Nothing came back except more static and the occasional burst of those phantom voices. The heater in my cab was running full blast, but I could feel cold seeping in around the edges. Not normal winter cold, but something deeper and more penetrating. It was the kind of cold that makes you understand how small and fragile humans really are, how quickly we can be erased by forces we do not understand. I cranked the heat higher and pulled my coat tighter, watching those strange lights grow slowly closer through the windshield. After what felt like an hour, but might have been 10 minutes or 10 hours, with time no longer functioning properly, the lights resolved into something I could almost understand. They were coming from structures of some kind, tall shapes rising from the snow like skeletal fingers pointing at the white sky. As I got closer, I realized what I was looking at. Wind turbine towers. Dozens of them, maybe more, standing in perfect rows that stretched away into the whiteout. But they were not complete turbines. They were just the towers. Massive steel columns rising 100 feet or more, with no turbine nacelles at the top and no blades attached. The pulsing light I had seen was coming from the towers themselves. Some kind of illumination built into the structures, or perhaps reflecting off them in ways that should not have been possible. The effect was hypnotic and disturbing, like watching a field of metal trees swaying in rhythm with a wind I could not feel. I slowed my truck even further, trying to process what I was seeing and what it might mean. The tire tracks I had been following led directly into the forest of towers. I could see now that there was something like a road, or at least a cleared path, winding between the structures. The spacing was regular and precise, exactly wide enough for a large truck to pass through. Someone had designed this place with big rigs in mind. But why? What purpose could possibly be served by a field of incomplete wind turbines in the middle of a storm that existed outside normal time? I thought about the cargo I was hauling. 3 sections of wind turbine blade, destined for a wind farm in Montana. But I was nowhere near Montana now. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere that should not exist on any map. And I was driving through a forest of towers that needed the exact type of components I was carrying. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. My headlights caught movement ahead, and I hit the brakes instinctively. The truck slid slightly on the snow-covered ground before the tires found purchase and brought me to a stop. I sat there staring through the windshield, trying to understand what I had just seen. There was another truck ahead of me, parked between 2 of the towers. It was a big rig like mine, pulling a flatbed trailer that looked nearly identical to my own specialized carrier, and it was loaded with wind turbine components. I sat there for a long moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and drive back the way I had come, storm or no storm, cycle or no cycle. But I had already driven too far into this impossible place. The path behind me had disappeared into the whiteout. and I had no way of knowing if I could even find my way back to the service building. Forward was the only direction that made any sense now. I put the truck in gear and drove slowly toward the parked vehicle. As I got closer, I could see more details. The truck was older than mine, maybe 15 or 20 years old based on the body style. The paint was faded and the chrome dulled by weather and age. But the cargo it carried looked fresh and new. 3 massive turbine blade sections secured with chains and straps that showed no signs of rust or deterioration. I pulled up alongside the parked truck and set my brake, leaving my engine running. The cab of the other truck was dark, no lights visible inside, no sign of movement. I grabbed my flashlight from behind the seat and climbed down from my cab, the wind and snow immediately attacking any exposed skin. I walked to the other truck and shone my light through the driver's side window. The cab was empty. No driver, no personal belongings, no indication that anyone had been there recently. But the keys were still in the ignition, and when I tried the door, I found it unlocked. I climbed up into the cab and looked around, searching for any clue about who had driven this truck here and where they had gone. The interior was clean but dated, with the kind of analog gauges and manual controls that had been phased out of newer trucks years ago. I checked the glove compartment and found the vehicle registration. The truck was registered to a company called Prairie Wind Transport out of Bismarck. The registration was dated 2015, 8 years ago. The driver listed was someone named Marcus Aldridge. I did not recognize the name, but something about seeing it written there in official documentation made this situation feel more real and more frightening. This had been a real person, a real driver just like me, hauling the same kind of cargo through the same impossible storm. There was a logbook on the passenger seat, the old-fashioned paper kind that drivers had to maintain before electronic logging became mandatory. I opened it and flipped to the last entry. The handwriting was shaky and uneven, like someone had written it while the truck was moving, or while their hands were shaking with cold or fear. February 14th, 2011. Followed the tracks past Service Point. Found the tower field. The lights are wrong. Everything here is wrong. Going to see how far the road goes. If anyone finds this, tell my family I tried to find a way out. Tell them I couldn't face going through the cycle again. M. Aldridge. The date stopped me cold. February 14th, 2011. 12 years ago. This driver had been here 12 years before me, on the same date, in what was presumably the same storm. The 4-year cycle Voight had mentioned suddenly made terrible sense. 2011, then 2015, then 2019, then 2023. Drivers getting pulled into exit 212 every 4 years. Some choosing to cycle through and forget, others choosing to follow the tracks and disappear into this place. I climbed down from the abandoned truck and walked back to examine its cargo. The turbine blade sections were massive, each one probably 40 feet long and weighing thousands of pounds. The securing chains looked tight and properly rigged, suggesting that Marcus Aldridge had been a careful and professional driver. But the blades themselves showed no signs of age or weather damage despite supposedly sitting here for 12 years. They looked as fresh as my own cargo, as if time had stopped for them the same way it had stopped for everything else in this place. I returned to my own truck and sat in the cab, trying to warm up and think through what I should do. I had found one abandoned truck, which meant there were probably others scattered throughout this tower field. The tire tracks I had been following were not from a single vehicle, but from multiple trucks driving this same impossible road over years or decades. All of them hauling wind turbine components. All of them drawn here by the storm and the pattern, and something else I still did not understand. The pulsing lights from the towers seemed to be getting brighter, or maybe just more noticeable as my eyes adjusted to their rhythm. I watched them through my windshield and noticed something I had missed before. The light pattern was not random. The towers were pulsing in sequence, creating a wave effect that moved through the field in a specific direction. The pattern was pointing, like an arrow made of light, showing the way deeper into the maze of steel columns. I should have stopped. I should have stayed with Marcus Aldridge's truck and waited for something, anything that made sense. But the pattern was calling to me the same way exit 212 had called to me, the same way those tire tracks had drawn me away from the service building. I put my truck in gear and followed the lights, driving deeper into the impossible tower field. The path wound between the structures in ways that seemed designed to disorient. Left turn, right turn, straight for a while, then another series of turns that left me with no sense of direction. I tried to keep track in my head, mapping the route so I could find my way back, but after a dozen turns I gave up. There was no going back. There was only forward, following the lights and the path that had been laid out for drivers like me. I passed 2 more abandoned trucks as I drove. One was even older than Marcus Aldridge's rig, a late 990s model that looked like it belonged in a museum. The other was newer, maybe from 2019 based on the styling. Both were carrying wind turbine components. Both had their keys still in the ignition, and both were completely empty of any sign of their drivers. My CB radio suddenly crackled to life with a clarity I had not heard since leaving the service building. It was not Marla Fenwick's voice this time, but something else. Multiple voices, all talking over each other, creating a chaotic jumble of words that almost made sense. I heard someone say, Tower 67, blade installation complete, and another voice respond, confirmed, moving to Tower 68. More voices joined in, all reporting similar information, all using those same formal, precise phrases that marked them as part of whatever organization or entity was running this place. Then one voice cut through all the others, loud and clear and undeniably human. This is Marcus Aldridge, Prairie Wind Transport. I'm at Tower 143. The assembly is complete. I understand now. I understand what they're building here. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Marcus Aldridge, the driver whose truck I had just examined, whose logbook entry was from 12 years ago. His voice was coming through my radio right now, in real time, from somewhere in this tower field. He was still here. Still alive, or at least still existing in whatever way people existed in this place outside normal time. I grabbed my CB microphone with shaking hands and keyed it. Marcus Aldridge, this is Abram Keene. I found your truck back at Tower 26. Where are you? What's happening here? Static filled the radio for a long moment, and I thought maybe he had not heard me. Then his voice came back, quieter now, more personal. Abram Keene. That name was in the logs at the service point. You're part of the pattern now. How many cycles have you been through? This is my first time remembering it, I said. Voight said I was here in 2019, but I don't have any memory of it. I followed the tracks instead of going back to the highway. Good, Marcus said, and I could hear something like relief in his voice. Then, maybe you can do what I couldn't. Maybe you can reach the end of the road before they finish the assembly. Assembly of what? What are they building with these towers? The radio went silent again, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was distant and hollow. The turbines aren't incomplete. They're waiting. Every 4 years, the storm brings more drivers, more cargo. We deliver the blades without knowing it. We assemble them without understanding what we're doing. The pattern uses us to build something that shouldn't exist. I looked out at the towers surrounding me, dozens visible through the snow, probably hundreds or thousands more stretching away into the whiteout. I thought about all those abandoned trucks, all those missing drivers, all that cargo of turbine blades delivered and installed by people who had been drawn into this place by forces they could not comprehend. "Where are you?" I asked into the radio. "Can I find you?" "I'm everywhere and nowhere," Marcus said. "Time doesn't work right when you've been here too long. I've been installing blades for 12 years, or maybe it's been 12 hours, or maybe it's been forever. The work never ends, and the towers keep growing, and the pattern keeps pulling in new drivers to help finish what I couldn't." My truck rounded another turn, and suddenly the landscape changed. The towers opened up into a clearing, and in the center stood something that made my mind struggle to process what I was seeing. It was a complete wind turbine, fully assembled with nacelle and blades, but impossibly massive. The tower had to be 500 feet tall, maybe more. The blades were so large that each one would have required multiple trucks to transport in sections. And the whole structure was glowing with that same pulsing light, brighter and more intense than any of the incomplete towers around it. "You see it now," Marcus said through the radio. "The first completed turbine. They started building it in 1967, or maybe it was always here and they're just making it visible. Every 4 years, every storm, every driver who follows the tracks delivers the pieces. We're building something that exists outside of time, Abram. And when it's complete, when all the towers are finished and all the blades are installed, something is going to change. Something fundamental about how the world works." I parked my truck and sat staring at the massive turbine. The blades were turning slowly despite there being no wind I could feel. They moved in perfect silence, each rotation taking minutes to complete. The motion was hypnotic and terrifying, like watching the hands of a cosmic clock counting down to something inevitable. "What do I do?" I asked. "How do I stop this?" "You can't stop it," Marcus said. "The pattern is too big, too old, too established. But you can make a choice that I didn't make. You can refuse to deliver your cargo. You can leave those blade sections on your truck and drive past the assembly point. Keep going until you find the edge of the pattern, if there is an edge. Nobody I've talked to has ever found it, but maybe you'll be different. What happens if I refuse? What happens if I just stop driving and wait? Then you become part of the pattern like I did. You'll start hearing the assembly instructions on the radio. You'll feel the pull to unload your cargo and install it where it belongs. Eventually, you'll give in because it's easier than fighting, and then you'll be here forever, maintaining the towers and waiting for the next driver to arrive with the next load of components." I looked at the complete turbine again, at its massive blades cutting through the white air with silent precision. Then I looked at the road ahead, at the path that continued past this clearing and deeper into the tower field. The tire tracks I had been following were still visible, leading onward. Other drivers had made the same choice Marcus was describing. They had refused to stop and deliver their cargo. They had kept driving, searching for an edge or an exit or an answer. And none of them had ever returned to tell what they found. My CB radio crackled again, but this time it was not Marcus Aldridge's voice. It was Marla Fenwick, clear and commanding. "Abram Keene, you have reached the assembly point. Your cargo is required for completion of Tower Sector 17, subsection 44. Please proceed with standard unloading protocols." I looked in my mirrors and saw lights approaching from behind. Multiple vehicles moving through the tower field toward my position. They were coming to collect my cargo whether I cooperated or not. The pattern had invested too much in pulling me here, in guiding me through the storm and past the service point and along the impossible road. It was not going to let me leave with those turbine blades still on my trailer. "Marcus," I said into the radio, "if I keep driving, if I go past the assembly point, what are my real chances of finding a way out?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Honestly, I don't know if anyone has ever made it. but I know for certain that stopping here means you never leave. So maybe the unknown is better than the certain. Maybe driving into the whiteout is better than becoming part of the pattern. The lights behind me were getting closer. I could make out the shapes now, several trucks and what looked like heavy equipment moving in convoy formation. They would be here in minutes, and then my choice would be made for me. I put my hand on the gear shift and made my decision. The engine roared as I hit the accelerator, snow spraying from my tires as I drove past the assembly point and deeper into the tower field. Behind me, I could hear voices on the CB radio calling out, telling me to stop, warning me that I was making a mistake. But I did not stop. I kept driving, following the faint tire tracks that disappeared ahead into infinite white. The towers flashed past on either side, their pulsing lights creating a strobe effect that made it hard to focus. I drove faster than was safe, faster than was sane, but I needed to put distance between myself and whatever was following me. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into a maze that might have no exit. And then, impossibly, the towers began to thin out. The path widened, the lights grew dimmer. I was reaching some kind of boundary, some edge to the pattern that Marcus Aldridge had said might not exist. Ahead, through the snow, I could see something that looked like an opening, a gap in the endless white. A place where the impossible road might finally lead back to somewhere real. The gap in the whiteout grew larger as I drove toward it, and for a moment I felt something like hope building in my chest. Maybe Marcus Aldridge had been wrong. Maybe there was an edge to this pattern, a boundary where the impossible rules stopped applying and normal reality began again. Maybe I was about to cross that boundary and leave this nightmare behind. But as I got closer, I realized the gap was not an opening back to the real world. It was something else entirely. The towers had stopped, yes, but what lay ahead was not empty prairie or highway or anything recognizable. It was a landscape that should not exist, could not exist. A place where the fundamental rules of how things worked had been rewritten by forces I could not begin to understand. The road continued forward through terrain that shifted and changed as I watched. Sometimes it looked like I was driving across frozen lake ice, perfectly smooth and transparent enough that I could see dark shapes moving in water that should not be there. Other times the surface became rough and broken, like driving across a field of shattered concrete or fractured stone. And sometimes, for brief moments, it looked almost normal. Just a snow-covered road leading through empty winter landscape. My truck bounced and lurched over the changing surface, the suspension working overtime to keep the wheels in contact with ground that could not decide what it wanted to be. The trailer behind me swayed and fishtailed, the heavy turbine blades shifting in their restraints despite the multiple chains and straps holding them down. Every instinct I had was telling me to slow down, to stop, to turn back before I drove completely beyond any possibility of return. But the lights behind me were still visible in my mirrors, still following, still pursuing the cargo I refused to deliver. The CB radio had descended into chaos. Dozens of voices now, all talking at once. Some giving coordinates and instructions, others asking questions or reporting status updates. I heard Marcus Aldridge's voice occasionally, warning me about sections of the road ahead, telling me which way to turn at intersections I could not see. I heard Marla Fenwick's voice too, calm and authoritative, directing the vehicles behind me, coordinating what sounded like an organized effort to intercept my truck and recover the turbine blades. And underneath all those voices, I heard something else. A low-frequency hum that was not quite sound, more like a vibration that I could feel in my bones. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, pulsing in rhythm with those lights from the tower field behind me. The pattern had a heartbeat, and I was hearing it through my radio because I had become part of it whether I wanted to or not. My dashboard clock was still frozen at 13:47, but I had been driving for what felt like hours since leaving the assembly point. The fuel gauge in my truck showed 3/4 full, which was impossible. I had been running the engine constantly, fighting through snow and difficult terrain, burning diesel at a rate that should have dropped the gauge significantly. But the needle had not moved. Either my gauge was broken or fuel worked differently here, consumed and somehow replenished by the same forces that kept the abandoned trucks looking fresh and the old newspapers feeling new. The landscape around me had taken on a strange quality that made depth perception almost impossible. I would see what looked like a distant hill or ridge, but when I drove toward it, the feature would turn out to be only a few feet away, or it would recede further into the distance as I approached. Objects in my peripheral vision seemed to move when I was not looking directly at them, creating the constant sensation of being surrounded by things that did not want to be observed directly. I passed another abandoned truck, and this one sent ice water through my veins. It was a Kenworth W900, painted in the exact colors of Dakota Logistics, my company. The truck looked nearly identical to my own rig, same model year, same configuration, same specialized flatbed trailer. I slowed down and shone my spotlight on it as I drove past, and that was when I saw the license plate. It was my license plate number. This was my truck. I hit the brakes and my rig slid to a stop on the uncertain ground. I sat there staring at the abandoned truck in my mirrors, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could my truck be both here, abandoned and empty, and also the one I was currently driving? The logical explanation was that it was not my truck, just another rig from the same company with a similar plate number. But I knew better. I knew with absolute certainty that I was looking at my own vehicle, the same truck I was sitting in right now. The CB radio crackled, and Marcus Aldridge's voice came through, quieter than before. "You're seeing the edges now, Abram. The places where the pattern loops back on itself. That truck you're looking at, it's you from a different cycle. Maybe from 2019 when you came through and chose to follow the tracks instead of cycling back. Or maybe from 2027 when you'll come through again. Time doesn't run in straight lines out here." "That's impossible," I said, even though I was staring at the evidence. "I can't be in two places at once." "You're not in two places," Marcus said. "You're in all places and all times where the pattern intersects. Every version of you that ever chose to follow the tracks, we're all here together, driving the same road through the same impossible storm. You just don't usually see the other versions of yourself because they're offset by 4 years or 8 years or 12 years. But out here at the edges, the offsets start to break down." I looked ahead down the road and saw more abandoned trucks now, scattered across the shifting landscape. Some looked exactly like mine. Others were different makes and models, but all of them were hauling oversized cargo, all of them displaying the wear and tear of having been driven through impossible conditions. And I knew with growing horror that every one of those trucks represented a driver who had made the same choice I made, who had refused to stop at the assembly point and kept driving in search of an exit that might not exist. "How many cycles?" I asked into the radio. "How many versions of me are out here?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "I've seen my own truck at least 4 times, which would mean I've been through at least 4 cycles since 2011. But I've also seen trucks that look newer than they should be, models that didn't exist yet when I first got pulled in. The pattern reaches forward and backward, pulling in drivers from years that haven't happened yet and keeping drivers from years long past." I put my truck in gear and started driving again, but slower now, more cautiously. I was navigating through a graveyard of possibility, past the abandoned shells of choices that had led nowhere. Every truck I passed was a warning and a prophecy, showing me what happened to drivers who thought they could escape the pattern by simply refusing to cooperate with it. The pursuing lights behind me had gotten closer during my stop. I could make out individual vehicles now, at least 5 or 6 trucks moving in loose formation. They were not driving in the jerky, uncertain way I was. They moved smoothly across the shifting terrain as if they knew every change before it happened, as if they were part of the landscape rather than fighting against it. The pattern was coming to reclaim its cargo and add me to the assembly team, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up. That was when I saw the structure ahead. At first, I thought it was another tower, another piece of the impossible construction project I had fled from. But as I got closer, I realized it was different. It was not a wind turbine tower, but something older and more substantial. A building, or what remained of one. A single-story structure with metal siding that had been weathered to the point of near transparency by wind and snow and time. The tire tracks I had been following led directly to this building, and I could see that they did not continue past it. This was where the road ended. This was as far as anyone had ever driven in search of an exit from the pattern. I pulled my truck up to the structure and stopped, leaving the engine running but setting the parking brake. The pursuing vehicles were maybe a quarter mile behind me now, close enough that I could hear their engines over the wind. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab one more time. The building had a door, and like everything else in this place, it was unlocked. I pulled it open and stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through darkness that felt thick and resistant, like the beam had to fight for every foot of visibility it achieved. The interior was one large room filled with filing cabinets and storage boxes, all of them covered in a thick layer of dust that had somehow accumulated despite the building having no obvious gaps or openings where wind could enter. The walls were covered with maps and charts, some of them showing Interstate 94 and the surrounding region, others depicting locations I did not recognize. But all of them shared one feature. They all showed Exit 212, marked clearly and officially, as if it was a real place that existed on real highways. I walked to the nearest filing cabinet and pulled open a drawer. Inside were folders, hundreds of them, each one labeled with a name and a date. I flipped through them quickly and felt my heart sink as I recognized what I was looking at. Driver files. Records of every person who had ever been pulled into the pattern. There were names going back to the 1960s, each file documenting arrival times, cargo manifests, vehicle information, and most chillingly, a status notation indicating whether the driver had chosen to cycle through or follow the tracks. I found my own file without much trouble. Keen Abram. The folder was thick, containing multiple entries. The earliest was dated February 14, 1991, 32 years ago. According to the record, I had arrived at exit 212 during a severe winter storm while hauling farm equipment. The status showed cycled, memory suppressed, returned to pattern. There were more entries for 1995, 99, 2003, 2007, 2011, 2015, and 2019. 8 cycles spanning 32 years. And in every single one, the status was the same. I had cycled through, forgotten the experience, and returned to normal life until the pattern pulled me back 4 years later. But the 2023 entry was different. The status was marked as tracking non-compliant, following service road. And below that, in handwriting rather than typed text, someone had written, "Subject has reached terminal archive. Pattern integration necessary within next cycle or timeline, corruption risk increases." I heard voices outside and realized the pursuing vehicles had arrived. I grabbed my file and several others, stuffing them inside my coat. If I was going to be integrated into the pattern, if I was going to become like Marcus Aldridge and spend eternity assembling towers and waiting for the next delivery, then at least I could take evidence of what was happening here. Maybe, in some future cycle, some version of me would find these files and understand what they were part of. The door opened, and Thatcher Voigt walked in, snow swirling around him. He looked exactly as he had back at the service building, unchanged and unchanging. Behind him, I could see Marla Fenwick and several others, all wearing the same official-looking uniforms, all carrying themselves with the same eerie calm. "You made it further than most," Voigt said, looking around the archive building. "Most drivers turn back when they start seeing their own trucks. The psychological stress of meeting yourself across different timelines usually breaks people before they reach this point." "What is this place?" I asked, holding up the files. "What are all these records? How long has this been going on?" "Since the first tower was erected in 1967, Voigt said. "Since someone decided to build a wind farm in a location that existed outside normal space-time. The pattern formed around that initial construction, creating a loop that pulls in exactly what it needs to continue growing. Drivers, cargo, machinery, all of it drawn in through exit 212 whenever the storm reaches the right intensity and the date aligns. And what happens when the construction is complete? When all the towers have their blades and the whole thing is finished?" Voigt smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe the pattern collapses and everyone trapped here gets released. Or maybe the pattern expands, pulling in more exits, more highways, more drivers. Maybe exit 212 is just the beginning." Marla Fenwick stepped forward. She was holding something that looked like a tablet computer, though the screen showed information that made no sense. Numbers and coordinates that changed too rapidly to read. Diagrams that hurt to look at directly. "Abram Keene," she said in that same calm, official voice I had heard on the radio. "You have exceeded acceptable deviation from standard pattern integration. Your cargo must be processed and your timeline must be aligned with established cycles. Further resistance will result in permanent displacement." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "It means you stop existing in any timeline," Voigt said quietly. "Not just here in the pattern, but everywhere. The pattern erases you completely, removes you from every cycle you've ever been part of. Your daughters won't remember you. Your wife won't have any memory of marrying you. You'll simply never have existed." I looked at the files in my hands, at decades of records documenting drivers who had been pulled into this nightmare. How many people have you erased? How many drivers have been removed from existence because they wouldn't cooperate? Voigt did not answer, but the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. The pattern did not tolerate permanent resistance. It would absorb you or erase you, but it would not let you escape. "I'll make you the same offer I made at the service building," Voigt said. "Come back with us. Deliver your cargo. Accept integration into the maintenance team. You'll exist here serving the pattern, but you'll exist. That's more than the alternative offers." I thought about Marcus Aldridge, still out there somewhere among the towers, installing blade after blade for 12 years, or 12 hours, or forever. I thought about all the other drivers who had made that same choice, who had decided that existing in service to the pattern was better than not existing at all. And I thought about my daughters, about whether they would notice if their father was suddenly erased from every memory and photograph and moment they had ever shared with him. The honest answer was that I did not know what to do. Neither choice was good. Both led to a kind of death, just different flavors of it. But I had driven this far, had seen this much, and something in me refused to go quietly into either option they were offering. "There's a third choice," I said, backing toward the door. "The one nobody talks about because nobody has ever taken it." "What choice is that?" Voigt asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew. "I keep driving," I said, "past this archive, past whatever lies beyond as far as the road goes. Maybe I find an exit, maybe I get erased, maybe I just drive forever. But at least I'll be making my own choice instead of accepting the only options the pattern wants to give me. I was out the door before they could respond, running through the snow toward my truck. I heard Voight calling after me, telling me I was making a mistake, warning me about what existed beyond the archive. But I was already in my cab, already putting the truck in gear, already moving. The road did continue past the archive, though it was barely visible now. More suggestion than reality. I followed it anyway, pushing my truck through conditions that should have been impossible to navigate. Behind me, I could hear the vehicles starting up, beginning another pursuit. But they seemed slower now, more hesitant, as if even the pattern was uncertain about what lay ahead. The landscape around me began to dissolve completely. The shifting ground, the swirling snow, the abandoned trucks, all of it faded into white nothingness. I was driving through pure void now, following a road that existed only because I believed it did. The dashboard lights in my cab flickered and dimmed. The heater stopped working. Even the sound of my engine grew distant and muffled. Marcus Aldridge's voice came through the radio one last time, faint and breaking up. "Abram, I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if anyone will ever hear me. But if you make it through, if you find a way out that I couldn't find, tell my family I tried. Tell them I didn't give up. Tell them—" The radio went silent. The dashboard lights went completely dark. The engine noise faded to nothing. But the truck kept moving, rolling forward through the white void on momentum or something else, something beyond physics or logic or any rules I understood. And then, so suddenly, it felt like waking from a dream, I was back on Interstate 94. Real highway, real pavement, real traffic moving in both directions. The storm was still raging, snow falling heavily, but it was normal snow. Natural weather, not the impossible whiteout of the pattern. I checked my mirrors and saw my trailer still attached, my cargo still secured. The dashboard clock was working again, showing 16:22. Nearly 3 hours had passed since I had taken exit 212. I drove for another 20 minutes in stunned silence before pulling into a truck stop outside of Bismarck. I parked and sat in my cab, my hands shaking, trying to process what had happened. Had it been real? Had I actually driven through an impossible place outside of time? Or had I simply hallucinated the whole thing due to stress and storm conditions? Then I remembered the files I had grabbed from the archive. I reached inside my coat and pulled them out. They were still there, still real, yellowed paper covered in typed text and handwritten notes. Documentation of decades of drivers pulled into the pattern. And right on top was my own file, showing 8 previous cycles spanning 32 years. I pulled out my phone and found I had signal again. I called my oldest daughter, needing to hear her voice, needing confirmation that I still existed in her memory. She answered on the second ring, sounding surprised but happy to hear from me. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important, and when we hung up, I felt tears running down my face. I still existed. I had not been erased, but I had not escaped either. I delivered my cargo to Montana the next day, the turbine blades handed over to the customer, just like any normal job. I went home to Bismarck and tried to return to normal life. But I could not stop thinking about exit 212, about Marcus Aldridge still trapped in the tower field, about all those files documenting drivers pulled into cycles they did not remember. I checked my maps obsessively for weeks afterward, looking for any mention of exit 212. Nothing. I asked other drivers if they had ever heard of a service facility at that location. Nobody had. I even called the North Dakota Department of Transportation and asked about storm shelters on Interstate 94. They told me there was no exit numbered 212 in their system. But I kept the files. I hid them in my house where my daughters would not find them, where nobody would accidentally discover them and think I had lost my mind. And every February, as the 14th approaches, I find myself watching the weather forecasts obsessively, dreading the sight of a winter storm warning for the region, because I know the pattern is still there. I know exit 212 will appear again when the conditions are right, when the storm reaches the proper intensity and the date aligns. And I know that sometime in the next 4 years, maybe in 2027 on February 14th, I will be hauling another load through North Dakota when the snow starts falling and the signs start appearing. And when that happens, I will have to make a choice again. Cycle through and forget, or follow the tracks and risk everything. The worst part is not knowing which choice I will make. The worst part is knowing that I have apparently made the choice 8 times before, and I cannot remember any of them. How many versions of me are out there right now, driving through the tower field, installing turbine blades, searching for exits that might not exist? Last week, I got a new assignment from my dispatcher. A load of wind turbine components, pickup in Jamestown, delivery in Glendive. The exact same route I was running when this all started. I told her I could not take it, made up an excuse about prior commitments, but the assignment is still sitting in my queue, waiting for me to accept it. And February is coming. The calendar on my wall shows it creeping closer, day by day. The weather forecasters are already talking about a major winter storm system developing over the northern plains. They say it should reach peak intensity around the middle of the month. I have been driving big rigs for 17 years, and I thought I knew every stretch of Interstate 94 through North Dakota like the back of my hand. But now I know there are roads within roads, exits that appear and disappear, places where the pattern pulls you in and never fully lets you go. Sometimes, late at night, I tune my CB radio to channel 19 and listen to the chatter. Normal trucker conversation, traffic reports, weather updates. But every once in a while I hear something else. A fragment of that same formal language. Someone giving coordinates that do not match any map. A voice calling out instructions for assembly operations at tower locations that should not exist. And sometimes, very rarely, I hear Marcus Aldridge's voice, still out there somewhere in the pattern, still trying to warn other drivers, still searching for a way out after 12 years or 12 hours, or forever. I should destroy the files. I should forget everything I saw and experienced. I should accept that I somehow hallucinated the whole thing and move on with my life. But I cannot. Because I know that exit 212 is real. I know the pattern is waiting. And I know that when February 14th arrives and the storm comes and I see those signs appearing on the highway, I will have to face the same choice again. Maybe this time I will cycle through and forget. Maybe this time I will follow the tracks and reach the edge I could not reach before. Maybe this time I will make the third choice, the one that leads beyond both the pattern and the archive, into whatever unknown territory exists past the limit of the impossible road. Or maybe I will just keep driving back and forth through the same 4-year cycle forever, delivering cargo to places that should not exist, building towers that reach toward skies that exist outside of time. I have been hauling freight through Minnesota's Iron Range for 6 years now, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that there is no lonelier stretch of highway in America than those mining roads in the dead of winter. Most people think of Minnesota and picture the Twin Cities, or maybe Duluth, but up here in the far northeast corner of the state, you are in a different world entirely. Mile after mile of dense pine forest broken only by massive open-pit iron mines, their rust-red walls carved into the frozen earth like wounds that never heal. The towns are small and far apart. The roads are maintained just well enough to keep the mining trucks moving, and when a winter storm rolls in off Lake Superior, you can find yourself completely cut off from civilization faster than you would think possible. My name is Nolan Priest, and I drive for Mesa B Freight out of Virginia, Minnesota. Not the state, the town. It is a small place built on iron mining, population maybe 8,000 on a good day, and it sits right in the heart of the Iron Range. The company I work for specializes in hauling equipment and supplies to the active mines scattered throughout the region. Heavy machinery parts, drilling components, industrial chemicals, the kind of cargo that keeps the mines operational and the local economy from collapsing completely. It is steady work that pays better than most trucking jobs because of the difficult conditions and the specialized knowledge required to navigate these roads safely. The roads up here are not like normal highways. Many of them started as mining access routes, rough tracks bulldozed through the wilderness to connect pit operations with processing facilities and rail yards. Over the years, they have been improved and paved, but they still retain that utilitarian character. Sharp curves, steep grades, minimal shoulders, and maintenance that focuses on keeping the surface drivable rather than safe or comfortable. In summer, you deal with logging trucks and tourist traffic heading to the boundary waters. In winter, you deal with ice, snow, and isolation that can turn deadly if you are not prepared. I learned to drive these roads from my father, who hauled taconite pellets for 30 years before his back gave out and forced him into retirement. He taught me to respect the Iron Range, to understand that the land up here does not care about your schedule or your plans. The weather changes fast, the roads can become impassable without warning, and help is often hours away if you get into trouble. The key to survival is knowing your limits, planning ahead, and never taking unnecessary risks just to meet a deadline. But sometimes the weather and the roads conspire against you in ways that no amount of planning can prevent. And that is exactly what happened to me last January during what the Weather Service later called the worst ice storm to hit the region in 20 years. I was hauling a load of replacement drill bits and hydraulic components to a mine site outside of Babbitt, a tiny town about an hour northeast of Virginia. The load was not particularly heavy, maybe 30,000 pounds total, but the equipment was expensive and the mine was desperate for it. One of their primary drills had broken down, and without those parts they would have to shut down an entire section of the operation. My dispatcher had impressed upon me the urgency of the delivery, but she had also made it clear that I should not take any risks if the weather turned bad. The forecast that morning had not looked particularly threatening. The meteorologists were calling for light snow and temperatures in the teens, typical January conditions for northern Minnesota. But anyone who has spent time in this region knows that weather forecasts are more like educated guesses than reliable predictions. The proximity to Lake Superior creates microclimates that can spawn localized storms with intensity that catches even experienced forecasters by surprise. I left Virginia around 10 in the morning, giving myself plenty of time to make the delivery and return before dark. The first hour of driving was uneventful. Highway 169 North was clear and dry, with just a few patches of snow on the shoulders. Traffic was light, mostly other commercial vehicles and a few hardy locals going about their business. The sky was overcast, but not threatening, just the typical gray ceiling that settles over the region for weeks at a time during winter. The trouble started when I turned off the main highway onto County Road 21, the mining access road that would take me the final 20 miles to the Babbitt site. This was a rougher road, 2 lanes of asphalt that wound through dense forest and skirted the edges of several abandoned pit mines. The county maintained it well enough for daily traffic, but it was not designed for bad weather. There were no snowplow stations nearby, no salt trucks standing by, no emergency services within easy reach. About 5 miles down County Road 21, I noticed the temperature starting to drop. My dashboard thermometer showed 18 degrees when I left the highway, but now it was reading 12 and falling. The wind had picked up too, gusting hard enough to rock my trailer occasionally. And then I saw the first drops of freezing rain hitting my windshield. Tiny pellets of ice that the wipers smeared across the glass instead of clearing away. Freezing rain is every trucker's nightmare, especially on roads like these. It starts innocently enough, just a light precipitation that seems harmless. But it builds up fast, coating everything it touches with a layer of clear ice that is nearly invisible and slicker than anything else you will encounter on the road. Black ice, we call it, because it takes on the color of whatever surface it is coating. On asphalt, it looks like wet pavement, which makes it even more dangerous because drivers do not realize they are on ice until they lose traction. I slowed down immediately, dropping my speed from 50 to 35. My truck was equipped with good winter tires and I had plenty of experience driving in bad conditions. But black ice does not care about your equipment or your experience. It will take your wheels out from under you faster than you can react if you are not extremely careful. I turned on my four-way flashers and moved to the center of the lane, trying to avoid the shoulders where ice would accumulate first. The freezing rain intensified over the next few miles, and I could see the road surface taking on that telltale wet sheen that indicated ice formation. My tires were starting to slip occasionally, that subtle loss of grip that tells you the road is getting dangerous. I was still 20 miles from the mine site, and maybe 15 miles from the last place where I had cell phone coverage. The smart decision would be to find somewhere to pull over and wait out the storm, but there was nowhere to pull over on this narrow road that would not put me at risk of being hit by another vehicle. I grabbed my CB radio and tried to raise anyone in the area, hoping to get a report on road conditions ahead. Channel 19 was mostly static, which was normal for this remote region. I switched to Channel 9, the emergency channel, and called out my position and situation. No response. I tried several other channels with the same result. Either there was no one within range, or the weather was interfering with radio transmission. Either way, I was on my own. The road ahead curved sharply to the left, following the edge of what looked like an old pit mine. The drop-off on the right side was probably 100 feet or more, straight down to the frozen bottom of the excavation. There were guardrails, but they looked old and poorly maintained, more rust than steel. I downshifted and took the curve at maybe 15 miles per hour, feeling my trailer start to swing out behind me as the tires fought for grip on the ice-covered asphalt. I made it through the curve and let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. But my relief was short-lived. The road ahead was getting worse, the ice buildup clearly visible now as a glossy coating that reflected my headlights. And my fuel gauge was starting to concern me. I had left Virginia with 3/4 of a tank, which should have been plenty for a round trip with a comfortable margin. But the slow speeds and difficult driving conditions were burning fuel faster than normal, and the gauge was now showing just under half a tank. That was when I started thinking about the old way station. Every driver who hauled freight through the Iron Range knew about it, though most of us had never actually seen it. According to the stories, there had been a DOT inspection facility somewhere along this stretch of County Road 21, built back in the 70s or 80s when the mines were running at full capacity and truck traffic was heavy enough to justify the expense. But the station had been closed for years, supposedly decommissioned when the mining industry declined and the volume of commercial traffic dropped below the level needed to support a full-time inspection facility. Some drivers claimed the station was still there, abandoned but intact, its buildings and scale platform slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Others said it had been demolished years ago and nothing remained but a concrete pad and some rusted fence posts. A few drivers, usually the ones with too many hours on the road and too much time alone with their thoughts, told stranger stories about the way station. They said lights could still be seen there sometimes at night, and that the radio equipment still broadcast on old frequencies, monitoring channels that had been officially retired decades ago. I had always dismissed those stories as truck driver folklore, the kind of tall tales that get embellished and exaggerated with each retelling. But as the ice storm continued to worsen and my fuel gauge continued to drop, the idea of finding that abandoned way station suddenly seemed less like foolishness and more like potential salvation. If the buildings were still standing, they would offer shelter from the storm. If the scale platform was intact, it would provide a safe place to park off the road. And if by some miracle there was any operational equipment left, it might include emergency supplies or communication gear. I kept my eyes open for any indication of where the station might be located. The problem was that I had never seen it myself, and the directions I had heard over the years were vague at best. Some drivers said it was about 10 miles up County Road 21 from the highway. Others claimed it was 15 or even 20 miles. One old-timer had told me it was located just past the third abandoned pit mine, but I had already passed at least 4 abandoned pits, and I was not certain which ones counted in his numbering system. The freezing rain was coming down harder now, and my wipers were struggling to keep the windshield clear. Ice was building up on the wiper blades themselves, reducing their effectiveness with each pass. I could see ice forming on my mirrors and on the front of my trailer, a clear indication that everything out here was getting coated with the same slick surface. My speed had dropped to 20 miles per hour, and even at that crawl I could feel the truck wanting to slide on every slight curve and grade change. That was when I saw the sign. It was old and weathered, barely visible through the freezing rain, but I caught it in my headlights as I crept around another curve. A metal sign mounted on a rusted post, the kind of official Diot signage that had not been used in at least 20 years. I could not read all the text, but I made out enough words to understand what it was indicating. Way station, 2 miles, all commercial vehicles. My heart rate picked up. The sign was ancient and probably long outdated, but it was the first concrete evidence I had seen that the old way station was real and not just driver mythology. 2 miles ahead, somewhere off this increasingly dangerous road, there might be shelter and a safe place to wait out the storm. I just had to make it that far without sliding off into one of those abandoned pit mines. The next 2 miles were the longest of my life. The road conditions continued to deteriorate, and I was now crawling along at barely 10 miles per hour, my transmission in the lowest gear, my tires hunting for any scrap of traction they could find. The forest on either side of the road had become a blur of gray and white, tree trunks disappearing into the freezing rain and low clouds that had descended to ground level. Visibility was down to maybe 50 feet ahead of my truck, and I was navigating as much by instinct and memory as by what I could actually see. I almost missed the entrance when it appeared on my right. It was not marked by any signs or lights, just a gap in the trees and what looked like a snow-covered access road leading away from the main highway. I hit my brakes gently, feeling the truck start to slide immediately on the ice. I eased off the brake and let momentum carry me forward until I could make the turn, my trailer swinging wide behind me as I maneuvered onto the access road. The road surface here was even worse than on County Road 21. It had not been maintained in years, and the asphalt was broken and potholed beneath the ice and snow. My truck bounced and lurched over the uneven surface, the heavy load in my trailer shifting slightly despite the chains and straps holding it down. I had committed to this turn now, and there was no going back. The access road was too narrow to turn around, and backing out onto County Road 21 in these conditions would be suicidal. The way station appeared through the freezing rain like something from a dream, or a memory I was not sure I had actually experienced. There were 3 buildings arranged around a concrete scale platform, all of them constructed in that utilitarian style common to government facilities from the 70s and 80s. Cinder block walls painted a faded yellow, flat roofs covered with decades of weathering, small windows that might have had glass in them once, but now showed only darkness. But what caught my attention immediately was that the buildings looked functional. Not well maintained, not modern, but operational in a way that made no sense for a facility that had supposedly been abandoned for years. There were lights on inside at least one of the structures, a faint glow visible through the grimy windows. The parking area around the scale platform had been plowed at some point, though not recently, leaving a surface that was snow-covered but relatively level and free of the deep drifts that would have accumulated over years of abandonment. Most striking of all was the equipment. I could see a generator housing attached to the main building, and I could hear the low rumble of a diesel engine running. Someone was here, or at least someone had been here recently enough to leave the generator operational. The thought of finding help, shelter, and maybe even a way to communicate with my dispatcher or the mine site filled me with relief. I maneuvered my truck into the parking area and found a spot where I could park safely away from the scale platform. I set my parking brake and left the engine running, not wanting to risk it not restarting in these conditions. The ice was still falling, coating everything it touched, and the temperature had dropped to single digits according to my dashboard thermometer. Without shelter and heat, I would not last long out here. I grabbed my heavy coat, my flashlight, and my CB radio handset, then climbed down from the cab into the storm. The wind hit me immediately, driving ice pellets into my face with enough force to sting. I pulled my coat collar up and my hat down, then made my way carefully across the icy parking lot toward the main building where I had seen lights. As I got closer, I noticed more details that did not quite add up. There was a coffee cup sitting on the windowsill outside one of the buildings, the kind of disposable paper cup you get at gas stations. It had about an inch of liquid frozen in the bottom, but the cup itself looked relatively fresh, not faded by weeks of sun and weather. Near the entrance to the main building there were boot prints in the snow, not completely filled in yet, but also not fresh enough to have been made in the last hour or two. The door to the main building was unlocked, which was both encouraging and slightly unsettling. I pushed it open and stepped into a small entry area that opened into what looked like a combination office and break room. The heat hit me immediately, a blast of warm air that felt incredible after the freezing conditions outside. The generator I had heard was clearly powering heaters somewhere in the building, maintaining a temperature that was probably around 60 degrees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Is anyone here? I'm a commercial driver, got caught in the ice storm, looking for shelter and maybe a phone." No response. I walked further into the building, my boots leaving wet tracks on the linoleum floor. The office area had desks and filing cabinets that looked like they dated from the 80s, covered with a light layer of dust, but not the thick accumulation you would expect from years of abandonment. There was a coffee maker on a counter in the break room area, and when I touched it, I found it was still slightly warm. On one of the desks I found a clipboard with what looked like a vehicle inspection log. The top sheet had entries from earlier today, though the handwriting was difficult to read, and the format was outdated compared to modern DOT paperwork. I picked up the clipboard and examined it more closely, and that was when I felt the first real stirring of unease in my gut. The date on the log sheet was January 15th, but the year was 2003, 20 years ago. And the entries documented the inspection of several commercial vehicles, all with descriptions and license plate numbers written in the same precise handwriting. At the bottom of the sheet, signed in flowing script, was a name: Eldon Rook, Weighmaster. I set the clipboard down and looked around the office with new eyes. Everything here looked like it had been in use recently, but it also looked like it belonged to a different era. The equipment was too old, the paperwork was too outdated, and the whole place had the feel of stepping into a time capsule that someone had accidentally left plugged in and operational. I walked to the window and looked out at my truck, sitting in the parking lot with its engine running and its lights cutting through the freezing rain. It looked solid and real and modern, a stark contrast to the frozen-in-time quality of this way station. And that was when I saw something that made my blood run cold despite the warm air in the building. There was another truck pulling into the parking area. A big rig, similar vintage to mine, hauling what looked like mining equipment. It drove past my truck and pulled up to the scale platform, as if the driver was preparing to go through a standard DOT weigh and inspection process. But that was impossible. This weigh station had been closed for years. There was no one here to conduct inspections, and yet I watched as the driver of that truck climbed down from his cab and walked toward the scale house, a small, separate building adjacent to the platform, as if he was following a routine he had performed dozens or hundreds of times before. I needed to get out there and talk to that driver, to find out what he knew about this place and why he was acting like the weigh station was operational. But as I turned from the window to head for the door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. It was a voice, male and authoritative, coming through a radio speaker mounted on the wall. Unit 734, you are cleared for scale inspection. Proceed to platform position 2 and wait for weighmaster authorization. The voice was using call signs and procedures that I recognized from old training manuals. The kind of formal DOT language that had been phased out in favor of more streamlined communication protocols years ago. And the voice itself had a quality that was hard to describe, something slightly wrong or artificial, like a recording that had been played so many times it had lost some essential element of humanity. I walked to the radio equipment and saw that it was old vacuum tube technology, the kind of gear that had not been manufactured since the 70s, but it was operational, lights glowing on the front panel, static hissing from the speaker, and that voice continuing to give instructions to commercial vehicles that I could not see. Unit 734, confirm your cargo manifest and destination. We are showing discrepancies in the weight distribution data. I looked out the window again at the truck on the scale platform. The driver was still there, standing beside his vehicle, but he seemed to be looking around in confusion, as if he was trying to understand where he was or how he had gotten there. And that was when I noticed something that should have been obvious from the start. The truck on the scale platform was not from my era. It was an older model, probably from the late 90s or early 2000s, with styling and equipment that marked it as a vehicle from 2 decades ago. And the driver, even from this distance, had something wrong about his appearance, something faded and uncertain, like a photograph that was slowly losing its color and detail. I was not alone in this weigh station with another driver seeking shelter from the storm. I was sharing this space with something else, some echo or recording or manifestation of the way this place used to function. And that voice on the radio, that formal authoritative voice giving instructions and requesting information, was not coming from any human source. It was coming from the weigh station itself, from whatever remained of its operational protocols and procedures, playing out like a recording that could not stop even after everyone who was supposed to be listening had long since moved on or disappeared. And I had just walked into the middle of it. I stood frozen in that office, watching the scene unfold outside through the grimy window. The driver from the older truck was still standing beside his vehicle on the scale platform, but his movements had become strange and repetitive. He would look down at a clipboard in his hands, then up at the scale house, then down at the clipboard again, following the same pattern over and over like a looped video recording. And each time he completed the cycle, his image seemed to flicker slightly, becoming less solid and more translucent. The voice on the radio continued its monologue, requesting information and giving instructions that the phantom driver could not hear or could not respond to. Unit 734, please confirm cargo weight distribution. We are registering an overload condition on your rear axle assembly. You will need to adjust your load or receive a citation for weight violation. I tore my eyes away from the window and focused on the radio equipment. The vacuum tube panels were glowing with that distinctive amber light, and I could see old-fashioned meters with needles that swung back and forth in rhythm with the voice transmission. There had to be a way to shut this down, to turn off whatever was creating these phantom communications and ghost manifestations. But as I reached for what looked like a power switch, I hesitated. What if turning off the equipment made things worse? What if the radio transmission was not causing the phenomenon but somehow containing it, keeping it limited to this building and this immediate area? I pulled my hand back and decided to leave the equipment running until I better understood what I was dealing with. Instead, I turned my attention to the filing cabinets that lined one wall of the office. If this place had been operational up through 2003 or beyond, there should be records that could tell me what happened here, why it was abandoned, and maybe explain the strange things I was witnessing. I pulled open the nearest drawer and found it stuffed with folders, each one labeled with a date range and containing what looked like inspection reports and weight certificates. I flipped through several folders, looking for anything recent or any indication of when the facility had ceased normal operations. Most of the records were routine, documenting commercial vehicles passing through the weigh station, their cargo verified, their weight checked against permits, all the standard DOT procedures. But as I worked my way through the files, I started noticing patterns that troubled me. There were gaps in the records, not random gaps, but systematic ones that occurred at regular intervals. Every fourth year, starting in 1979, there would be a period of about 2 weeks in January where the inspection logs would show unusual activity. More vehicles than normal passing through, weight discrepancies that could not be explained, and notations in the margins written in different handwriting that seemed to indicate confusion or concern among the staff. I pulled out a folder labeled January 1991 and found a thick stack of reports marked with red stamps saying, "Anomaly, requires review." The inspection logs from that month showed dozens of vehicles that had been weighed and processed, but when I looked closely at the details, nothing made sense. The same license plate numbers appeared on multiple days, sometimes on the same day at different times. Vehicle descriptions did not match the makes and models listed, and cargo weights varied wildly for trucks that were supposedly hauling the same loads through multiple inspections. At the bottom of the 91 folder, I found a handwritten memo on official DOT letterhead. The handwriting was shaky and difficult to read, but I could make out the gist of it. To Regional Supervisor DOT District 4, from Eldon Rook, Weighmaster Station 47. Date, January 23, 1991. Sir, I am formally requesting an investigation into the irregularities that have been occurring at this facility during the past 2 weeks. Equipment malfunctions cannot account for the data we are recording. I have personally witnessed vehicles passing through inspection that I know I inspected days earlier, but the drivers have no memory of previous stops. The scale readings are showing impossible weight variations. And most disturbing, I have seen the same truck with 3 different cargoes in a single afternoon. I have served at this station for 12 years, and I have never encountered anything like this. I am requesting either immediate technical support or temporary closure of the facility until we can determine what is causing these phenomena. The other staff members are becoming increasingly concerned, and our technician Hetty Larimer has reported equipment behavior that she cannot explain with normal mechanical or electrical failures. I await your response and guidance on how to proceed. The memo was signed in that same flowing script I had seen on the clipboard, Eldon Rook's signature clear and official. But there was no indication of what response, if any, he had received from his supervisors. I checked the subsequent folders looking for follow-up documentation, but the next file was labeled February 91 and showed a return to normal operations with no mention of the January anomalies. I pulled out more folders, jumping ahead 4 years at a time to see if the pattern continued. January 1995, same thing. Reports of irregularities, confused drivers, impossible weight readings, vehicles appearing multiple times. January 1999, even more documentation of strange occurrences, with additional memos from Eldon Rook requesting help and expressing growing alarm at what he was witnessing. And then January 2003, the last year with any substantial records in the filing cabinet. The 2003 folder was different from the others. It contained the usual inspection logs and weight certificates, but it also contained incident reports, what looked like internal investigation documents, and a series of photographs that had been paper-clipped to a manila envelope marked "Evidence, do not remove." I opened the envelope carefully and spread the photographs on the desk. They had been taken inside and around the weigh station, showing various pieces of equipment, the scale platform, the interior of the buildings. But what caught my attention were the photographs showing the parking area and access road. In several of them, I could see trucks that appeared to be semi-transparent, ghost images captured on film alongside solid, normal-looking vehicles. In one particularly disturbing photograph, I could see 3 different versions of what appeared to be the same truck occupying the same space, like a triple exposure but with slightly different positions and orientations. Underneath the photographs was a final report, typed on official DOT stationery and signed by someone named Hetty Larimer, station technician. The report was dated January 17, 2003, and the tone was professional, but carried an undercurrent of fear. Equipment Analysis Report, Weigh Station 47, submitted by Hetty Larimer, Senior Technician, Nate, January 17, 2003. After 2 weeks of continuous monitoring and testing, I have been unable to identify any conventional mechanical or electrical cause for the anomalies occurring at this facility. The scale equipment is functioning within normal parameters when tested with calibrated weights. The radio transmission equipment passes all diagnostic checks. The generator and power systems show no irregularities. However, the phenomena continue. Vehicles are being recorded by our automated systems that do not match visual observations. Radio transmissions are being received on frequencies that should be inactive. The scale platform is registering weights for vehicles that are not physically present on the platform. Most concerning is the temporal inconsistency I have documented. On 3 separate occasions, I have witnessed vehicles entering the facility that I later confirmed, through vehicle registration databases, were not manufactured until years after the date they supposedly passed through our station. On 2 occasions, I encountered commercial drivers who claimed to have no memory of previous inspections that our logs clearly show they underwent. I have reviewed the historical records for this facility and discovered that similar phenomena have been documented every 4 years, going back to at least 1979. Each occurrence lasts approximately 2 weeks in January, then ceases abruptly. During these periods, the weigh station appears to be operating in multiple timeframes simultaneously, creating overlaps and intersections that should not be possible. I am recommending immediate closure of this facility pending a full investigation by specialists with expertise in whatever is causing these occurrences. Weighmaster Rook concurs with this recommendation. We cannot continue to operate a DOT inspection facility under these conditions. The report ended there, with Hetty Larimer's signature and a notation that copies had been sent to multiple levels of DOT administration. But there was nothing in the file indicating what response the report had received or what actions had been taken. I checked the remaining folders and found that they ended abruptly after January 2003. There were no records for February or any subsequent months. It was as if the weigh station had simply ceased to exist as far as official documentation was concerned. I sat down at the desk and tried to process what I was reading. This place had been experiencing temporal anomalies for decades, regular occurrences that happened every 4 years in January. Vehicles from different time periods appearing simultaneously, drivers with no memory of previous visits, equipment that recorded things that had not happened yet or were still happening from events years in the past. And now, here I was, in January of 2024, exactly 21 years after the last documented occurrence. 21 years, not 20, which meant I was not in the middle of a regular 4-year cycle, unless the cycle had continued even after the facility was officially closed. The voice on the radio suddenly changed, interrupting my thoughts. Instead of the formal DOT instructions, I heard something different. A woman's voice, tired and frustrated, speaking in a conversational tone that contrasted sharply with the official transmissions. "Eldon, are you seeing this? I have 3 trucks on the scale right now, but only 1 is showing up on the weight sensors. And I'm getting radio signals from vehicles that aren't even here yet. The frequency analyzer is showing transmissions from next week. This is getting worse." A male voice responded, and I recognized it as the same authoritative tone that had been giving the formal instructions earlier. But now, it sounded more human, less artificial. "I see it, Hetty. Same thing that happened in '99. It starts with the phantom readings. Then we start seeing the actual manifestations. By the end of the week, we'll have trucks from half a dozen different time periods all trying to use the facility at once. We need to shut down," Hetty's voice said. "This isn't safe. What if one of these drivers gets caught in a temporal overlap? What if they get stuck here permanently?" "I've been requesting shutdown authorization for days," Eldon's voice replied. "But the regional office isn't taking it seriously. They think we're reporting equipment malfunctions, not actual temporal phenomena. Until someone with authority shows up and sees this for themselves, we're stuck here trying to manage something that shouldn't be possible." The transmission faded back into static, and I realized I had been listening to a recording, or rather an echo of a conversation that had happened 21 years ago. Hetty Larimer and Eldon Rook, the technician and the weighmaster, discussing the same impossible situation I was witnessing now. They had been trapped here, trying to do their jobs while reality fractured around them, waiting for help that apparently never came. I stood up and walked to the window again. The phantom truck on the scale platform had vanished, but now there were 2 other vehicles in the parking area that I had not seen arrive. One was a flatbed hauling timber, old enough that it could have been from the 80s or 90s. The other was a tanker truck that looked more modern, maybe from the early 2000s. Neither vehicle had drivers visible, and both had that same slightly translucent quality I had noticed before, like images projected onto the physical space rather than solid objects occupying it. My own truck was still there, solid and real, its engine running and its lights cutting through the freezing rain. It looked out of place among these ghost vehicles, too modern and too concrete. And that gave me an idea. If I was witnessing echoes from the past, vehicles and events that had happened years ago but were somehow bleeding through into the present, then maybe my presence here was creating an echo that would bleed through into another time. Maybe someone in 2003 or 1999 or 91 could see my truck the same way I was seeing theirs. I grabbed my CB radio handset, the one I had brought in from my truck, and keyed it. "This is Nolan Priest, Misabi Freight, broadcasting on Channel 19. If anyone can hear this, I'm at the old way station on County Road 21. I'm caught in an ice storm and I need information about this facility. Does anyone copy?" Static was the only response at first, but then I heard something that made my skin crawl. My own voice, but distant and distorted, saying the exact same words I had just spoken. It was like hearing an echo, but one that was delayed by seconds rather than milliseconds. And underneath my repeated message, I could hear other voices, dozens of them, all broadcasting on the same channel, all calling for help or information, all trapped in this same location at different points in time. I released the transmit button, and the cascade of voices faded, leaving only the normal static of an empty channel. But I knew now with certainty what I was dealing with. This way station was not just abandoned. It was caught in some kind of temporal loop, replaying the same 2-week period every 4 years, pulling in drivers who passed by during those windows and trapping them in overlapping timelines that should not be able to coexist. The question was whether I could leave. My truck was still running, still functional, still connected to my present-day reality. But if I drove away from here, would I return to normal January 2024 conditions on County Road 21? Or would I find myself displaced in time, arriving at the Babbitt mine site 20 years too early or too late? A ghost driver in a ghost truck passing through a world that had moved on without me? I needed more information before I made any decisions. The filing cabinets had given me historical context, but I needed to understand the mechanism, the cause of these temporal anomalies. There had to be something that triggered the phenomena, some explanation for why it happened every 4 years, and why it centered on this specific location. I walked to the back of the building where I had seen another door, one that presumably led to the scale house or the generator room. If Hetty Larimer had been trying to document the equipment failures and temporal inconsistencies, she would have focused her investigation on the machinery itself. Maybe she had left notes or findings that would explain what was causing the way station to malfunction across time. The door opened into a maintenance area filled with electrical panels, tool benches, and spare parts. Everything was covered with dust except for one corner of the room where a workbench had been cleared and covered with papers, diagrams, and what looked like technical specifications. I walked over and examined the materials, recognizing Hetty Larimer's name on several of the documents. What I found there was both fascinating and terrifying. Hetty had not just been documenting equipment failures. She had been trying to understand the fundamental nature of what was happening at the way station. Her notes were filled with references to temporal mechanics, quantum uncertainty, and something she called chronological resonance. She had been theorizing that the way station itself, through some combination of its electronic equipment and its physical location, had become a kind of temporal anchor point, a place where different time periods could overlap and intersect. One diagram showed the way station at the center of concentric circles, each circle labeled with a year: 1913, 1983, 1907, 1991, and so on, in 4-year intervals. Lines connected the circles at specific points, and those connection points were all labeled with dates in January. Hetty had mapped out the pattern, showing how the temporal overlaps occurred in predictable cycles, always during the same 2-week window, always intensifying until they reached a peak and then suddenly stopped. But what caught my attention was a note she had written in the margin of the diagram, in handwriting that looked hasty and worried. If the pattern continues beyond 2003, the overlaps will start compounding. Multiple timelines intersecting simultaneously instead of sequentially. Anyone caught at the station during a compound overlap could be displaced across multiple time periods. Possible permanent temporal dislocation must convince them to close facility permanently. I looked at the date on her notes, January 16th, 2003, the day before she had submitted her final report. And based on what I was experiencing now, her warning had either been ignored or the facility had been closed too late to prevent the pattern from continuing. The temporal resonance she had identified had not stopped just because the way station was officially decommissioned. It had kept building, kept cycling through its 4-year pattern, and now in 2024 I was caught in what might be one of those compound overlaps she had feared. The lights in the maintenance room flickered, and I heard the generator outside change pitch. The steady rumble became uneven, surging and fading in a pattern that did not sound like normal mechanical operation. I walked to the small window that looked out toward the generator housing and saw something that defied rational explanation. The generator was there, solid and functional, producing the power that lit the building and ran the heaters. But overlapping it, occupying the same space, I could see other versions of the generator in different states of repair. One looked brand new, its housing pristine and unmarked. Another looked old and rusted, barely functional, and a third was partially disassembled, surrounded by tools and parts that flickered in and out of visibility. I was seeing the generator as it existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. And if I could see that, then the temporal overlap was intensifying. The compound effect Hetty Larimer had warned about was happening right now, pulling together not just 2 or 3 time periods, but potentially decades worth of overlapping realities. I needed to get back to my truck and make a decision about whether to stay or try to leave. But as I turned to head for the exit, the radio in the main office crackled to life again with a transmission that stopped me cold. It was Hetty Larimer's voice, but not the recorded conversation I had heard earlier. This was a direct transmission, speaking in real time, or at least what passed for real time in this fractured temporal space. "This is Hetty Larimer, station technician. If anyone is receiving this transmission, please respond. I am trapped in the maintenance bay. The temporal overlap has locked the doors and I cannot get out. The date here is January 17th, 2003. But I can see through the windows that it is not 2003 outside. I can see vehicles from different years. I can see the parking area as it looks in multiple time periods. Something has gone wrong with the containment." I grabbed the CB radio handset from the main office and responded without thinking. "Hetty, this is Nolan Priest. I'm at the way station right now. The year is 2024. I can hear you. Where exactly are you?" Static filled the radio for a long moment, and then her voice came back, tinged with confusion and hope. 2024. That is 21 years from my present. You are receiving this transmission across 2 decades of temporal displacement. How is that possible? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm looking at your notes right now. The diagrams you made showing the temporal pattern. You were right about everything. The compound overlaps, the intensification, all of it. It is happening now." "Then you need to leave immediately," Hetty's voice said urgently. "If you're experiencing a compound overlap, this entire facility is becoming temporally unstable. You could be displaced to any time period within the resonance pattern. You might never make it back to your own present." "What about you?" I asked. "If you're trapped in 2003 and I'm here in 2024, can I help you get out?" There was a long pause before she responded. "I don't think so. If I'm speaking to you across 21 years, then I might already be beyond help. Time is not moving the same way for me as it is for you. I might be experiencing hours while you experience minutes, or vice versa. We might be trapped in different reference frames that never quite sync up." The implications of that were staggering and horrifying. Hetty Larimer had been trapped in a temporal pocket for 21 years, possibly experiencing subjective time at a different rate, isolated from normal causality, and I was on the verge of joining her unless I could find a way to break free of the way station's temporal influence. "I'm going to try to reach the access road," I said into the radio. "If I can get far enough from the facility, maybe I can break out of the temporal resonance." "Be careful," Hetty's voice warned. "The boundaries of the resonance field are not stable. You might cross what you think is the edge, only to find yourself deeper in the overlap. The only certain way to escape is to wait for the cycle to end. In past occurrences, the phenomena always stopped after 14 days. 14 days? I looked out the window at the ice storm still raging outside. I can't wait that long. I'll run out of fuel, I'll run out of food. And you said yourself this is a compound overlap. The normal rules might not apply." "Then you are taking a serious risk," Hetty said. "But it might be your only chance. Just remember, if you do make it out, tell them what happened here. Tell them the way station needs to be demolished, not just closed. As long as the structure exists, the temporal resonance will continue. Every 4 years, more drivers will get caught in it. I acknowledged her warning and clipped the radio to my belt. It was time to make my choice. Stay here in the relative safety of the heated building and risk becoming permanently displaced across time, or make a run for my truck and hope I could drive far enough to escape the resonance field before the compound overlap trapped me completely. Looking out at the parking area, I could now see at least a dozen vehicles, all from different time periods, all occupying the same space in ways that should have been physically impossible. My truck was still there among them, still solid and real. But for how much longer? I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, ready to make my escape attempt. Behind me, the radio continued to crackle with transmissions from multiple time periods. Voices calling out across decades, all trapped in the same impossible moment that kept repeating at the Black Ice Way station. I pushed through the door and back into the ice storm, the cold hitting me like a physical blow after the warmth of the heated building. The freezing rain was still falling, maybe even harder than before, coating every surface with that treacherous layer of clear ice. But what stopped me in my tracks was not the weather. It was what the parking area had become, where there had been maybe a dozen ghost vehicles when I looked out the window moments ago. There were now dozens more. The entire parking area was filled with trucks from different eras, all occupying the same space, all flickering in and out of solidity like a badly tuned television signal. I could see vehicles from the 70s with their distinctive boxy styling, trucks from the 80s and 90s, more modern rigs from the 2000s, and even a few that looked contemporary to my own 2024 model. They were layered on top of each other, transparent and overlapping, creating a dizzying visual effect that made depth perception almost impossible. My truck was still there, and it was still solid. I could see it clearly among all the phantom vehicles, its running lights cutting through the temporal chaos. But the path to reach it was now crowded with obstacles that might or might not be physically present. I had no way of knowing which ghost trucks I could walk through, and which ones had enough temporal solidity to block my path, or worse, trap me inside their displaced time frames if I made contact. I started walking carefully across the parking lot, testing each step before committing my full weight. The ice beneath my feet was real enough, slick and treacherous, but the vehicles around me shifted and changed with each step I took. A flatbed hauling lumber would appear solid directly in front of me, forcing me to change direction, then fade to transparency as I approached, revealing a completely different truck behind it. Halfway to my own vehicle, I heard engines starting, not the sound of one or two trucks, but dozens of them, all firing up simultaneously in a cacophony that hurt my ears. The ghost vehicles around me were coming to life, responding to some command or schedule from their respective time periods. I watched as several of them began to move, driving in patterns that made no sense, passing through each other and through solid objects without any indication that they registered the obstacles. One truck, a tanker from what looked like the early 90s, drove directly toward me. I had maybe 3 seconds to decide whether to stand my ground, gambling that it was just a phantom that would pass harmlessly through me, or to dive out of the way and risk serious injury on the ice-covered ground. The truck's headlights were bright and solid-looking, its engine noise loud and real. At the last possible moment, I threw myself to the side. I hit the ground hard, my shoulder taking the brunt of the impact, and slid several feet across the ice. The tanker truck passed through the space where I had been standing, and I felt something as it went by. Not a physical impact, but a sensation of wrongness, like walking through a cold spot in a warm room, or touching something that should be one temperature but feels like another. The truck's displaced timeline brushed against mine, and for just a fraction of a second, I saw through the driver's window into the cab. There was someone behind the wheel. A man, maybe 40 years old, with a confused expression on his face. He was looking around as if trying to figure out where he was, and his lips were moving like he was speaking or calling out for help. Then the truck was past me and fading back into translucency, and the driver's desperate face disappeared along with it. I struggled to my feet, my shoulder aching from the fall, and continued toward my truck more cautiously. The CB radio clipped to my belt crackled continuously now, picking up dozens of overlapping transmissions. I heard Hetty Larimer's voice occasionally, still trapped in her 2003 temporal pocket, calling out warnings and technical information. I heard Eldon Rook giving official way station instructions from various years, his formal tone unchanged across decades. And underneath it all, I heard other drivers, other voices, all confused and frightened, all trying to understand what was happening to them. This is Gerald Paxton, hauling iron ore to the processing facility. I just stopped at the way station for inspection, but everything looks wrong. The equipment is too old. The staff is wearing uniforms from 20 years ago. Can anyone tell me what's happening? This is Marcus Tolliver, refrigerated transport. I'm at some kind of inspection facility, but I can't find any staff. There are other trucks here, but no drivers, and my GPS is showing impossible coordinates. Is anyone receiving this? This is Sandra Brightwell, logging truck en route to International Falls. I stopped here in 2007 for routine inspection, and now I can't leave. Every time I drive toward the exit, I end up back at the scale platform. It's like the roads are looping. Someone please help me. The voices went on and on. A catalog of drivers who had been pulled into the way station's temporal resonance over the decades. Some of them sounded recent, their confusion fresh and immediate. Others sounded distant and hollow, as if they were calling out across vast expanses of time that had stretched and distorted their voices beyond recognition. All of them were trapped, caught in the same impossible situation that I was now fighting to escape. I reached my truck and grabbed the door handle, feeling the solid metal beneath my gloved hand. This was real. This was my present, my timeline, my vehicle. I pulled the door open and climbed into the cab, grateful for the familiar surroundings and the steady rumble of my own engine. Inside the cab, the temporal chaos outside seemed slightly muted, as if my truck's physical integrity created a small bubble of normal causality. I checked my fuel gauge and felt my stomach drop. It showed less than a quarter tank now, which was impossible. I had been idling for maybe an hour, which should have consumed only a small fraction of my fuel supply. But somehow, I had burned through more than half a tank. Time might be fractured outside, but it was apparently running at different rates in different places, and my fuel consumption was responding to some accelerated timeline that did not match my subjective experience. I grabbed my CB microphone and tried one more time to raise someone, anyone, from my own time period. This is Nolan Priest, Masabi Freight, broadcasting from the old way station on County Road 21. I'm experiencing severe temporal anomalies and attempting to evacuate the area. If anyone from 2024 can hear this, please respond. Static and overlapping ghost voices were the only response. I was cut off from my present, surrounded by echoes from the past and possibly the future. But I still had my truck. I still had fuel, and I still had a chance to drive out of this temporal trap before it claimed me permanently. I put the truck in gear and started moving, navigating carefully through the maze of phantom vehicles that crowded the parking area. Several times I had to stop and wait as ghost trucks drove across my path, their displaced forms passing through my vehicle with that same cold, wrong sensation I had felt when the tanker nearly hit me. Each time it happened, I felt a pull, like something was trying to drag me out of my timeline and into theirs. The access road leading back to County Road 21 should have been directly ahead, a clear path out of the facility, but as I drove toward where I knew the exit was located, the landscape seemed to shift and change. The tree line moved, the buildings rearranged themselves, and the road I was following curved in directions that did not match my memory. I was experiencing what Sandra Brightwell had described, the way station's temporal resonance creating loops and distortions in physical space that made escape impossible. I tried a different approach, turning right instead of left, following what looked like a service road that ran behind the maintenance building. This path was narrower and less maintained, but it seemed to lead away from the main facility. I followed it for maybe 200 yards, my truck bouncing over rough ground, and then I saw something that made me slam on the brakes. There was another truck ahead of me, parked perpendicular across the service road, completely blocking my path. It was an older model, probably from the late 80s, and it looked solid enough to be physically present rather than a temporal ghost. As I sat there with my engine idling, trying to decide whether to attempt going around it or backing up and finding another route, I saw movement in the other truck's cab. Someone was in there. A driver slumped over the steering wheel, not moving. I could not tell if they were unconscious, sleeping, or worse. But they were the first apparently solid human being I had seen since arriving at this facility besides the phantom manifestations from other time periods. I grabbed my flashlight, left my engine running, and climbed down from my cab. The freezing rain had not let up, and the ice coating everything was now at least a quarter-inch thick. I made my way carefully to the other truck and knocked on the driver's side window. No response. I knocked harder and called out, "Hey, are you okay in there? Can you hear me?" The figure behind the wheel stirred slightly, and I felt a wave of relief that they were alive. I tried the door handle and found it unlocked. The door opened with the creak of frozen metal, and I shone my flashlight into the cab. The driver was a man, probably in his 50s, wearing a heavy winter coat and a knit cap. His eyes were closed and his skin was pale, but I could see his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He was alive, but clearly in distress, possibly hypothermic despite his warm clothing. "Sir, can you hear me? My name is Nolan Priest. I'm a truck driver like you. We need to get you warmed up and figure out how to get out of here." The man's eyes flickered open, focusing on me with difficulty. When he spoke, his voice was weak and confused. "What year is it?" The question caught me off guard. "It's 2024, January 15th. What's your name?" "Vincent," he said slowly. "Vincent Garrick. I drive for Arrowhead Transport out of Duluth. But it can't be 2024. I just stopped here yesterday for a weigh inspection. It was January 8th, 1999. My blood went cold. This man thought it was 99. He had been trapped here for 25 years, or at least caught in a temporal displacement that made him believe it was still 1999. I had no idea how long he had actually been here in his subjective experience. But based on his condition, it could not have been more than a day or two. Time was running at different rates for different people caught in the way station's resonance. "Vincent, you've been temporally displaced. The year really is 2024. This facility has been causing temporal anomalies for decades, trapping drivers in different time frames. I'm trying to get out of here, and you need to come with me." He looked at me with eyes that were struggling to focus. "Temporally displaced? That doesn't make any sense. I just stopped for an inspection. Eldon Rook was the weighmaster on duty. He told me to park here while he checked my cargo manifest. I was only supposed to wait a few minutes." "How long have you been waiting?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Vincent thought about it, his face scrunching with the effort of concentration. "I'm not sure. My watch stopped working. My phone died. I tried to start my truck and leave, but the engine wouldn't turn over. I've been sitting here trying to stay warm, waiting for someone to come help me. How long has it been?" I did not know how to answer that question. For Vincent, subjectively, it might have been hours or days. But objectively, according to the calendar, he had been missing for a quarter century. His family would have long since given up hope of finding him. He would have been declared dead, his affairs settled, his life moved on without him. And now here he was, barely aged, displaced from 99 into 2024 by forces neither of us understood. "We need to go," I said, helping him out of his cab. "My truck is still running. If we can get far enough from the facility, maybe we can break out of the temporal resonance field." Vincent was weak and unsteady on his feet, and I had to support most of his weight as we made our way back to my truck. The ice made every step treacherous, and the phantom vehicles around us were becoming more active and more solid with each passing minute. I could feel the temporal chaos intensifying, the boundaries between different time frames dissolving as Hetty Larimer's feared compound overlap reached its peak. We were almost back to my truck when the CB radio on my belt erupted with a transmission that was louder and clearer than anything I had heard before. It was Hetty Larimer's voice, but filled with urgency and fear. "To anyone receiving this transmission, the temporal resonance has reached critical levels. I'm reading intersections from at least 15 different time periods, all converging on this location simultaneously. The compound overlap is causing the resonance field to expand. It's no longer contained to just the way station facility. The effect is spreading outward along County Road 21. Anyone within 5 miles of this location is now at risk of temporal displacement." 5 miles? That meant even if I got back on the county road, I might still be within the resonance field. The temporal trap was growing, reaching out to catch more drivers, more vehicles, more lives to add to its collection of displaced souls. I got Vincent into my passenger seat and ran around to the driver's side. As I climbed into the cab, I saw something through my windshield that made my heart sink. The access road ahead was no longer clear. Where there had been forest and open ground, there was now a solid wall of overlapping structures. I could see multiple versions of the way station buildings occupying the same space, flickering between different states of construction and repair. The facility was multiplying across its own timeline, creating physical barriers from temporal echoes. "We're trapped," Vincent said quietly, stating the obvious. "There's no way out." I refused to accept that. I put my truck in reverse and started backing up, trying to find another route. But everywhere I looked, the temporal chaos was closing in. The parking area that had been clear behind me was now filled with dozens of solid-looking vehicles, all jockeying for position, all trying to navigate through the same impossible space. That was when my CB radio crackled again with a different voice. Male, authoritative, and speaking with calm certainty. "Nolan Priest, this is Eldon Rook. I know you can hear me across the temporal displacement. I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you." I grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "Rook, I'm here. I found your reports, your memos. You tried to warn them about this place. Why didn't they shut it down?" "Because they didn't believe it was possible," Eldon's voice replied. "By the time they took the warning seriously, it was too late. The temporal resonance had established itself too firmly. Closing the facility didn't stop the effect. It just removed the human oversight that might have contained it. Can you tell me how to get out of here? There has to be a way to break free of the resonance field." There was a long pause before Eldon responded, and when he did, his voice carried a weight of sadness and resignation. "There are 2 ways out, Mr. Priest. The first is to wait for the cycle to complete. In approximately 72 hours, the resonance will fade and return to dormancy for another 4 years. Anyone still present at that time will be released back to their original timeline. 72 hours? I don't have enough fuel to run my engine that long. And what about Vincent Garrick? He's been here since 1999. If he gets released back to his original timeline, he'll still be trapped in the past." "That's correct," Eldon said. "Temporal displacement is not reversible through the natural cycle completion. Those who have been displaced across years will remain displaced when the resonance fades. The second way out is more dangerous, but offers the possibility of returning to your correct timeline." "What is it?" "The temporal resonance emanates from a specific point source within the facility. Hetty Larimer identified it during her final investigation in 2003. It's located in the basement level of the main building, in what used to be the electrical substation. If you can reach that location and disrupt the source, you might be able to collapse the resonance field entirely." "Might?" I did not like the uncertainty in that word. "The resonance has been building for over 40 years, Eldon explained. "Collapsing it suddenly could cause a temporal shockwave that would affect everyone caught in the field. You might be returned to your proper timeline. You might be scattered across multiple time frames. Or you might cease to exist entirely, erased from causality as the timeline reorganizes itself without the artificial intersection point." I looked at Vincent slumped in my passenger seat, at the temporal chaos outside my windshield, at my fuel gauge showing less than a quarter tank. 3 terrible options, and I had to choose quickly before the decision was taken away from me. "If I try to disrupt the resonance source," I said into the radio, "what exactly do I need to do?" Hetty Larimer's voice joined the transmission, overlapping with Eldon's. "There's a control panel in the basement substation. It's old technology, vacuum tubes, and analog switches. You need to overload the system, force it to draw more power than it can handle. The resulting feedback should destabilize the temporal resonance. Should, you're not certain." "Nothing about this situation is certain," Hetty said. "I've been trapped in my own temporal pocket for 21 years trying to understand the mathematics of what's happening here. The best I can tell you is that disrupting the source gives you a chance. Waiting out the cycle guarantees nothing except that you'll survive to be caught in the next cycle 4 years from now." I made my decision. Sitting in my truck watching my fuel gauge drop while the temporal chaos intensified around me was not survival. It was just a slower form of being trapped. I had to try to break free, even if the attempt carried risks I could not fully understand. "I'm going to try it," I said. "Vincent, you need to stay in the truck with the engine running. If this works and the resonance collapses, the truck might be pulled back to the correct timeline. If it doesn't work, at least you'll be warm and have a chance when the cycle completes." Vincent looked at me with eyes that were clearing slightly as the warmth of the cab revived him. "What about you?" "I'm going to do what I should have done when I first got here. I'm going to trust that someone knew what they were talking about when they warned this place was dangerous, and I'm going to try to shut it down before it traps anyone else." I grabbed my flashlight, my CB radio, and what little courage I could muster. Then I opened my door and stepped back out into the temporal storm, heading toward the main building and whatever source of impossible power was waiting in its basement. Behind me, Vincent called out one last question. "If this doesn't work, if you don't make it back, what should I tell people? What should I say about what happened here?" I looked back at him through the freezing rain and the flickering ghost trucks that filled the air between us. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that some places remember things they shouldn't. Tell them that time doesn't always move forward in straight lines, and tell them that when the signs say a way station is closed, there's usually a very good reason why." Then I turned and walked toward the building, ready to confront whatever temporal nightmare was waiting in its depths. The journey from my truck to the main building should have taken 30 seconds. It took me nearly 10 minutes, navigating through a landscape that kept rearranging itself with each step. The parking lot expanded and contracted. distances stretching and compressing as different temporal layers fought for dominance over the same physical space. I watched the main building shift between at least 4 different states of repair, flickering from newly constructed to weathered to partially demolished and back again. The phantom vehicles were everywhere now, and many of them had drivers. I could see dozens of truckers sitting in their cabs or standing beside their vehicles, all with that same confused and desperate expression. Some of them looked right at me, their mouths moving as if calling out for help, but no sound reached my ears. They were trapped in their own temporal pockets, experiencing their own versions of this nightmare, unable to interact with anyone outside their specific displaced time frame. I recognized some of the names I had heard on the CB radio. A woman standing beside a refrigerated truck who must have been Sandra Brightwell, trapped since 2007. A younger man leaning against a flatbed hauling iron ore. Probably Gerald Paxton from one of the earlier cycles. And there, near the scale platform, I saw a figure in what looked like a DOT uniform, moving with purpose between vehicles as if conducting inspections that would never be completed. That had to be Eldon Rook himself, or at least a temporal echo of him, still performing his duties decades after the facility had officially closed. I pushed through the front door of the main building and immediately felt the temperature difference. It was not just warm anymore. It was hot, oppressively so. The heaters must have been running at maximum capacity across multiple time frames simultaneously, creating a compound effect that made the interior feel like a furnace. Sweat broke out on my forehead within seconds, and I had to unzip my heavy coat to avoid overheating. The office area looked different than it had during my first visit. The furniture was rearranged, or rather, it existed in multiple arrangements at once. I could see 3 different configurations of desks and filing cabinets occupying the same space, flickering between layouts from different years. The coffee maker on the counter was simultaneously full of fresh coffee, empty and unplugged, and completely absent depending on which temporal layer was dominant at any given moment. I found the door leading to the basement stairs without much trouble. It was marked with a faded sign that said electrical, authorized personnel only. And it was the only door in the building that appeared solid and consistent across all the temporal variations. That made sense. If this was where the resonance originated, the source point itself would be the most stable location in the entire facility. The stairs descended into darkness, and my flashlight beam seemed to struggle against shadows that were thicker than normal darkness should be. I could hear sounds from below, a deep thrumming that was part mechanical noise and part something else, something that I felt in my chest as much as heard with my ears. It was the sound of the temporal resonance itself, the physical manifestation of decades of accumulated temporal distortion. The basement was larger than I expected. A single, open space that must have extended under most of the main building. The walls were lined with electrical equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum of industrial history. Massive transformers, circuit breaker panels with huge knife switches, banks of vacuum tubes glowing with that distinctive amber light, and in the center of it all, a control panel that would not have looked out of place in a 1950s science fiction movie. But what dominated the space was the resonance core itself. I had no other word for what I was seeing. It was not a single piece of equipment, but rather a confluence of energy and distorted space that had formed around the electrical substation. The air itself looked wrong there, bent and twisted like heat shimmer but with colors that should not exist and geometries that hurt to look at directly. Within that distorted space, I could see fragments of the basement as it appeared in different time periods, all existing simultaneously, all trying to occupy the same location. My CB radio crackled with Hetty Larimer's voice, clearer down here than it had been anywhere else. "Nolan, if you can hear me, you've reached the resonance core. What you're seeing is the accumulated result of 45 years of temporal intersection. Every 4-year cycle adds another layer of distortion. By now, the core has become a fixed point in space-time that exists across multiple decades at once. I keyed my radio. "I'm here, Hetty, but I'm not seeing any obvious way to overload this system. There are too many controls, too many pieces of equipment. I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Look for the master power distribution panel," she instructed. "It should be on the east wall, a gray metal cabinet about 6 feet tall. Inside are the main circuit breakers for the entire facility. You need to close all of them simultaneously, force the system to draw maximum power from every temporal layer at once." I found the panel she described and pulled it open. Inside were rows of heavy-duty breakers, each one labeled with faded handwriting indicating what circuit it controlled. Most of them were in the off position, which made sense for a facility that had been officially decommissioned, but a few were still engaged, providing power to the generator and the equipment that had been running when I arrived. "Hetty, won't closing all these breakers just restart the facility at full capacity? How does that collapse the resonance?" Her response carried a note of grim determination. "The resonance core is drawing power from multiple time frames. When you close those breakers, you'll be demanding power from every temporal layer simultaneously. The electrical grid can't support that kind of load across time. Something has to give, and when it does, the feedback should destabilize the temporal intersection." "Should," I noted again. "What happens if it doesn't work?" "Then you'll likely be at ground zero when approximately 45 years' worth of accumulated electrical load discharges all at once. The resulting explosion probably won't kill you because you'll be temporarily displaced before the physical blast wave reaches you. But where or when you'll end up is impossible to predict." I looked at the rows of breakers, at the glowing resonance core beyond them, at the impossible geometries of distorted space-time that filled the basement. I thought about Vincent Garrick sitting in my truck, displaced from 99 and unable to get home to his own time. I thought about Hetty Larimer, trapped in 2003 for 21 years. I thought about all the other drivers whose voices I had heard on the CB radio, all caught in the way station's temporal trap, with no way out except to wait for a cycle that might never fully release them. "I'm doing it," I said. "If this is the only way to break the resonance, then it has to be done." "Nolan, wait." It was Eldon Rook's voice now, joining the transmission. "You need to understand what you're about to do. Collapsing the resonance won't just affect the people currently trapped here. It will affect everyone who has ever been caught in the temporal cycles. All of us exist in a state of quantum uncertainty, our timelines suspended and overlapping. When you collapse that state, causality will have to resolve itself. Some of us might return to our proper places in time. Some of us might never have existed at all. You could be erasing decades of lives and memories." I stood with my hand on the first breaker, considering his words. He was right. I had no way of knowing what collapsing the resonance would do to all the people who had been displaced by it. But I did know what would happen if I did nothing. The resonance would continue to grow, the compound overlaps would intensify, and more drivers would be pulled into this temporal nightmare every 4 years forever. "I'm sorry, Eldon," I said quietly, "but this has to end. It should have ended decades ago when you first warned them about the anomalies. Maybe if I had been in your position, I would have found a different solution. But right now, this is the only option I can see." I started closing breakers, working my way down the rows, engaging each circuit one after another. With each breaker I closed, I could hear the electrical systems coming to life, humming and buzzing with increasing intensity. The lights in the basement grew brighter. The vacuum tubes glowed hotter, and the thrumming sound from the resonance core increased in volume and pitch. When I closed the 5th breaker, the temporal distortions became visible as more than just bent air. I could see actual cracks forming in reality, dark lines that spread across the basement walls like fractures in glass. Through those cracks, I caught glimpses of the basement as it existed in other time periods. I saw Hetty Larimer working at a diagnostic station in 2003, her face tight with concentration. I saw Eldon Rook descending these same stairs in '91, carrying a clipboard and looking worried. I saw workers in older uniforms from the 70s and 80s, all of them moving through their routines, unaware that they were being observed across decades of separation. The 10th breaker brought a cascade of electrical arcing across the vacuum tube banks. Blue-white lightning jumped between components, and the smell of ozone filled the air. The temperature in the basement spiked even higher, and I could feel my skin beginning to burn from the radiant heat. I kept closing breakers, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get out of the basement before the entire system overloaded. Breaker 15 caused the resonance core to pulse violently, expanding outward in a wave of distorted space-time that passed through me like cold water. For just a moment, I experienced temporal displacement directly. I was simultaneously standing in the basement in 2024, climbing down the stairs in 2003, and not present at all in 1979, when the facility was newly constructed. My consciousness existed in all three states at once, and the sensation was so disorienting that I nearly lost my balance and fell. "Nolan, you're almost there!" Hetty's voice came through my radio, distorted and breaking up. "Just a few more breakers. The resonance is destabilizing. I can see the mathematical patterns collapsing." I reached for breaker 18, one of the last large switches in the panel. My hand was shaking from the heat and the temporal distortion, and it took 3 tries to get a solid grip on the handle. When I finally pulled it closed, the entire basement was filled with a sound like reality itself screaming in protest. The resonance core exploded outward, not as a physical blast, but as an expanding wave of temporal energy that swept through everything in its path. I saw the basement walls dissolve into a kaleidoscope of different time periods, all visible at once, all bleeding into each other. I saw myself standing at the breaker panel from a dozen different angles and time periods, each version slightly different, each one making the same choice to close that final switch. And then I saw what was at the center of the resonance core. Not equipment or machinery, but something else, a moment, frozen and repeated endlessly. It was January 15th, 1979. The day the way station had first gone operational. I could see the staff conducting their first vehicle inspection, running their equipment through its initial tests, everything new and functioning exactly as designed. But there had been a solar flare that day, a massive burst of electromagnetic radiation that had struck the Earth's magnetic field at precisely the moment the way station's electrical systems were energized for the first time. The combination of the facility's particular electromagnetic signature and the solar storm's energy had created a temporal resonance that locked that moment into a permanent loop. Every 4 years, when the solar cycle brought conditions similar to that first storm, the resonance would spike, pulling in anything nearby and adding it to the endless repetition of that inaugural day. I closed the last breaker. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every piece of electrical equipment in the basement overloaded simultaneously, drawing power from every temporal layer at once. The vacuum tubes shattered. The transformers exploded in showers of sparks, and the circuit breakers I had just closed immediately tripped open again, as the system tried desperately to protect itself from impossible electrical loads. But it was too late. The resonance core could not maintain itself against the feedback, and it collapsed inward like a star going supernova in reverse. All the accumulated temporal energy from 45 years of 4-year cycles imploded into a single point, and then exploded outward in a wave of causality correction that swept through the entire facility. I felt myself being pulled in multiple directions at once, my timeline fragmenting and then reassembling as the wave passed through me. For a subjective eternity that probably lasted less than a second, I existed in every time period the way station had ever touched. I saw myself as a child, as a teenager, as a young man learning to drive truck from my father. I saw myself in 2024 and in 2028 and in futures that had not happened yet. I saw timelines where I had never stopped at the way station, where I had driven past it in the ice storm and completed my delivery without incident, and then, with a sensation like being slapped awake from a deep sleep, I was back in my body, standing in the basement of the way station with the smell of burning insulation filling my lungs and the sound of collapsing electrical equipment ringing in my ears. The resonance core was gone. The temporal distortions had vanished. The basement was just a basement again, dark and full of destroyed equipment, but firmly anchored in a single timeline. I grabbed my flashlight from where I'd dropped it and swept the beam around the space. No flickering temporal echoes, no glimpses of other time periods, just normal, solid, present-day reality. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, desperate to get out of the basement before the building's structural integrity failed. The main floor was in chaos, with furniture scattered and windows blown out by the energy discharge, but it was all solid and consistent. No temporal overlays, no ghost images from other years. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. The phantom vehicles were gone, dissolved along with the temporal resonance that had created them. My truck was still there, engine running, Vincent Garrick visible through the windshield. But as I ran toward it, I noticed something that made my heart sink. There were other trucks scattered around the parking area. Real, solid trucks, not temporal ghosts. And beside each one, I could see drivers standing in confusion looking around as if they had just woken from a dream. I recognized some of them from the phantom images I had seen earlier. Sandra Brightwell was there, standing beside her refrigerated truck. Gerald Paxton was climbing down from his flatbed. And there, near the scale platform, was Eldon Rook himself. No longer a ghost or a radio voice, but a solid physical person in his Waymaster uniform. Collapsing the resonance had not erased the displaced people. It had released them, dropping them back into physical reality at the moment when the temporal trap finally broke. But they were not restored to their proper time periods. They were all here, now, in 2024, displaced from their original timelines by years or decades. I reached my truck and pulled open the door. Vincent looked at me with wide eyes. What happened? There was this wave of something, like being underwater and coming up for air, and now, all these other drivers are appearing out of nowhere. The temporal resonance collapsed, I explained, climbing into the cab. Everyone who was trapped in the displaced time frames got dumped back into present-day reality. They're free of the trap, but they're not back in their own times. So I'm really in 2024? I can't go back to 1999? I shook my head. I don't think so. The timelines have resolved. You exist here now, in this present. You'll have to find a way to adjust to a world that moved on without you for 25 years. Vincent slumped in his seat, the implications sinking in. His family would be 25 years older. His job would be long gone. The world he remembered would be fundamentally different in ways he could not yet imagine. But he was alive, physically present, and no longer trapped in a temporal loop. It was not the happy ending he deserved, but it was better than the alternative. I put the truck in gear and started driving toward the access road, navigating around the confused drivers and their newly solidified vehicles. The ice storm was still raging, the freezing rain still falling, but the landscape no longer shifted and changed. County Road 21 was right where it should be, solid and navigable, leading back to normal roads and normal towns and a normal world that followed normal rules about how time worked. My CB radio crackled one final time with Hetty Larimer's voice, but clearer than I had ever heard it before. "Nolan, are you there? I'm in the maintenance building. The temporal pocket collapsed. I'm back in normal time. What year is it?" I grabbed the microphone with a shaking hand. "It's 2024, Hetty, January 15th. You've been displaced 21 years from your original timeline." There was a long silence, and then her voice came back, tinged with a mixture of relief and sorrow. 21 years. My daughter would be in her 30s now. My husband probably remarried. The world I knew is gone. "But you're free," I said. "You're not trapped anymore. None of us are." "No," she agreed quietly. "We're not trapped. We're just lost in time, trying to find our way in a present that's not ours." I drove away from the way station without looking back, following County Road 21 through the ice storm toward the mine site where my cargo was supposed to be delivered. The delivery was hours late now, and I would have to explain the delay to my dispatcher, though I had no idea how to explain what had actually happened without sounding insane. Behind me, I could see other trucks beginning to follow. A convoy of temporarily displaced drivers trying to find their way back to roads they recognized and towns they remembered. Some of them would make it. Some of them would struggle to adapt to a world that had changed beyond recognition during their absence. All of them would carry the memory of being trapped in that way station, caught in temporal loops that repeated endlessly until someone finally broke the cycle. I completed my delivery to the Babbitt mine site around midnight, nearly 14 hours late. The operations manager was angry until I showed him the ice damage on my truck and told him I had been forced to take shelter during the worst of the storm. He accepted the explanation, though he made it clear that future delays would not be tolerated regardless of weather conditions. I drove back to Virginia the next day, taking Highway 169 instead of County Road 21. I could not bring myself to drive past that way station again, even though I knew the temporal resonance was gone. The building was just a building now, empty and decommissioned, no longer a trap for unwary travelers. But I did not want to see it, did not want to be reminded of what I had experienced there. Over the next few weeks, I heard stories on the news about mysterious appearances of missing persons throughout northern Minnesota. Truck drivers who had been declared dead after disappearing years or decades ago were turning up confused and disoriented, claiming they had just stopped at a way station for a routine inspection. The authorities treated them as cases of amnesia or mental breakdown, unable to accept the truth of what had really happened to them. Vincent Garrick contacted me a month later. He had managed to track down his family and was slowly rebuilding connections with children who had grown up without him and a wife who had mourned and moved on. It was painful and difficult, but he was grateful to be alive and free, even if the life he returned to bore little resemblance to the one he had left. Hetty Larimer disappeared from public record shortly after the incident. I tried to find her to see how she was adjusting, but it was as if she had decided to vanish into her new present rather than trying to reconcile with a past that no longer existed. I hoped she found peace somewhere, found a way to build a new life in a world that had moved on without her. Eldon Rook was the only one who seemed to transition smoothly to the present day. He was old enough that 20-odd years of displacement did not fundamentally change his stage of life. He retired from the Department of Transportation officially, citing health reasons, and moved to a small town in northern Minnesota where nobody knew his history or asked uncomfortable questions about where he had been. As for me, I kept driving. I kept hauling freight through the Iron Range, through those same mining roads and isolated stretches that had led me to the way station in the first place. But I was more careful now about where I stopped during bad weather, more attentive to the warnings that some places carry about their past. The way station itself was demolished 6 months after the incident. The Department of Transportation finally acknowledged that the facility had structural issues and ordered its complete removal. They bulldozed the buildings, ripped up the scale platform, and tore out all the electrical equipment that had created the temporal resonance in the first place. The site was graded flat and allowed to return to forest with no markers or signs indicating what had stood there. But I know. Every time I drive past that stretch of County Road 21, I know what used to be there. And on cold January nights when ice storms blow in off Lake Superior, I sometimes wonder if the temporal resonance is truly gone, or if it is just dormant, waiting for the right conditions to reform and begin trapping drivers again. I have been hauling freight through Minnesota's Iron Range for 6 years now, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that some places remember things they should not. Some places hold on to moments and repeat them long after those moments should have faded into history. And some places, if you are not careful, will pull you in and keep you forever, or at least until someone is brave enough or foolish enough to break the cycle. The way station is gone now. The temporal resonance is collapsed. The trapped drivers are freed, though freedom in the wrong time period carries its own kind of imprisonment. But sometimes, late at night, when I am monitoring Channel 19 on my CB radio, I hear voices that sound familiar. Drivers calling out positions on roads that no longer exist, requesting assistance at facilities that were demolished years ago, speaking in radio protocols that have not been used in decades. And I wonder if we really did collapse the resonance, or if we just broke one cycle and started another. I wonder if somewhere, in some temporal pocket we did not find or could not reach, there are still drivers trapped at the black ice way station, waiting for the next cycle to complete, hoping someone will come to free them. The ice storms still come every winter. The mining roads still freeze and become treacherous. And sometimes, when the conditions are just right, when the temperature drops just enough and the freezing rain falls just hard enough, I swear I can see lights in the distance where that way station used to stand. Lights that pulse and glow like equipment that is still running, still operational, still waiting for the next truck to pull in for inspection. I do not stop to investigate. I keep driving, keep hauling my loads, keep following the roads that I know are real and solid and firmly anchored in the present day. Because I learned at that way station that time is not as linear as we like to think. I learned that some places exist in multiple moments at once, and that the boundaries between past and present are thinner than we want to believe. And I learned that sometimes the only way to escape a trap is to spring it, even if you cannot be certain what will be released when you do.